Hey, welcome to the channel. In this video, I'm going to assume you've never worked with Next.js before, but we're going to set up the following features. We're going to integrate with a database and let users sign up for an account, log in, log out. We're going to let users create their own content, edit and delete their own content, upload images for their content. We're going to learn how to use AI to sort of expand the images in either direction. So using generative AI, so there's room to layer our text on top. By the way, in this app, we're building haikus. So we're letting users create their own account, add 3 lines of text, and then we're dynamically placing that text on top of an image. So along the way, we'll learn about auth, we'll learn about JSONWebTokens, we'll learn about cookies, and much more. Now, circling back to that aspect of creating images, that brings us to the sponsor of this video, which is Cloudinary. Cloudinary is an amazing platform that makes it really easy for us to host, our user uploaded images. But then as a developer, Cloudinary is a dream. It makes it really easy to manipulate and transform the images in almost any way you could imagine, just using simple API parameters. So if you've never heard of Cloudinary before, I think you're in for a treat in this video. A big thank you to Cloudinary for sponsoring this video and making it freely available here on YouTube. Now, without further ado, let's jump into a sneak peek preview and look at the finished product of what you and I are going to build together in this video. So the homepage lets you sign up for an account if you don't already have one. If you do have one, you can just click log in here, but let's sign up for a new account. YouTube demo, super secure password of QWERTY. I don't have any haikus currently. Let's go ahead and create one. So I did not create this haiku. I borrowed this from Google. I'm not sure who the original author is, but let's say like the sky is so blue. The sun is so warm up high, and I love the summer. Let's choose an image to upload. So this picture isn't really a summer-inspired image, but it's going to show how we're using generative AI to make extra room on either side of the image for our haiku text to sit on top of. So let's go ahead and choose that. It's going to upload. It's going to automatically close this widget as soon as the upload finishes. Cool. Let's go ahead and click submit. We get a cool animation, to show that it's loading, it's generating the image. Should only take another maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Cool. Now this is actually a great chance to show off the edit and delete features. Let me edit that and try a different image with maybe a darker background. I'll use this image of this cat. So it's uploading. It's now done. I can click submit. That image only needs to be generated once, and then it's sort of stored, cached forever on Cloudinary servers. But the initial creation takes a few seconds. There you have it. So in terms of CRUD, we created the haiku. We are reading the haiku. We just practiced updating it. Now we can click this icon to delete it. Beautiful. And you can click log out. Cool. So we have a fully functioning application. We're going to use Tailwind and Daisy UI to style it. We have a lot of work ahead of us, but you are going to learn so much about Next.js. Without further ado, let's jump into the action and start building. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is create a brand new empty folder somewhere on your computer. So I have this totally empty folder on my desktop named Our Haiku App, and we're just going to open this up either in your terminal or your text editor. So here's my text editor. I use VS Code. If you don't have VS Code, you can just pause this video. It's free software. Just visit the official site, get it downloaded and installed. Anyways, with that folder open, we want to run a command in our terminal. So controller command J to open your terminal in VS Code. And now we're going to need Node.js in order to run this command. Now, if you followed some web development tutorials in the past, you might already have Node installed. You can check that really quick by just in your command line saying Node and then a space and then -v. And as long as you see some sort of version number, that's great. You already have Node installed. If you don't have Node, that's fine. Just pause the video and go get it installed from the official website. Cool. So with Node installed and we've got our terminal or text editor pointed towards our new empty folder, here's what we're going to do. Let's say npm init-y. It's going to create a new project, sort of a new grocery list for us, package.json. Okay, and now we can install the dependencies that we need. So we can say npm install. We need Next, right? The Next framework. Let's make sure it's the latest version. So @latest. We also need React @latest. And we need React-DOM @latest. Go ahead and press enter. Okay, now we have everything we need. So let's create our first page in Next. So over in your sidebar with all of your files, we need to create a folder and it needs to have this exact name. It needs to be named app. Inside of app, let's create a new file, and it needs to have this exact name. Name it page.jsx. In this new file, let's say export default function, capital page, parentheses, curly brackets, and let's just return. And here's where we can return the HTML that we want for that page. Now, technically, this isn't actually HTML. It's a syntax called JSX, but it looks very familiar or very similar to HTML. If you just give it a single element, you don't need parentheses and you can just stay on a single line here. However, if you want multiple lines, then you would say parentheses, return parentheses, and now you can still only have one top level element. However, you could say like, I want a div, and then inside of there, you could have like a heading, hello, and then you could have like a paragraph with some lorem ipsum. And if you didn't want an unnecessary div in your HTML, you can use this syntax. This is called a React fragment. But the idea is that when you're returning a block of JSON, you can only have one like top level parent or container element. Cool. So let's give this file a save. And now the question becomes like, how would we actually preview our Next.js app in the web browser? Like, what command do we run down in the command line to actually spin up our local server? Well, we need to jump into our package.json file, and we just need to add a few scripts. Now, you could type these out manually, but what I like to do is just go to the official Next.js website, and if you click on Docs, and then click on Installation, and then just scroll down a little bit, so not automatic installation, but I'm looking for manual installation. Perfect. And then just right about here, yep, here's the scripts text. So you don't need the outer curly brackets, but I would just select from, the quote of scripts down to that inner curly brackets, just copy that into your clipboard, and then just replace your scripts in package.json. So now be sure to end that with a comma. Cool, let's give that a save. And now we have this convenient script called dev. So down in your command line, you can just say npm run dev. Should take maybe 2 or 3 seconds to get ready, and then you can go back to your browser, and then up in your address bar, just visit localhost:3000. Awesome, and there you have it. There is that page with the JSX, right? The heading level 3, the paragraph, beautiful. Now that we have one page, let's try to create a second page and then link to it. Like maybe an About Us page, or in our case, with our app that we're building, why don't we have a login page? So how would we set up a URL pattern for like /login? Well, in Next.js, routing is file-based. So just in our sidebar, in the app folder, you would just create a new subfolder inside of app and name it whatever you want the URL to be. So like if we wanted, /login, you create a folder with that name, and then inside that folder, it needs to have the name of page.jsx. Cool, and then to save some typing, you could just borrow the code, in your homepage, page.jsx, just copy all that, paste it into your new login page, and you could change this to say like login page. Cool, and then you could go back into your homepage and maybe just include a link to that page. You could say like, like an A element that points to /login and says login page. So there's your homepage. When you click on this, boom, look at the address bar, perfect. However, we just included a traditional, old-fashioned A element, and using this would defeat most of the point of using Next.js in the first place. Because an A element is going to perform a full page reload. And when you're using Next, you want sort of that single page application, right? Sort of the client-side routing for any subsequent navigations. So the Next.js way of having a link like this, let me show you what you would actually do. Up at the top, and again, this is in the home page, page.jsx. Up at the top, you could say import link from quotes next/link. And just to be clear, that's uppercase link when we're saying import right here. Lowercase link for this package name. But now we can use this uppercase link. So instead of an A element here, let's just have like an opening and closing link, element sandwich, and then give it an attribute of href, just like you would an A element, say login, and then the text you would click on says login here. Let's give that a test. So there you see it, and you click on it. The reason this is so cool is if you open up your console, and down here you could say like 2 + 2 is 4. But now when I click login, notice it's not a full page reload, and you can click the back button. So this is that spa experience. This is why, a big reason why, we're using Next.js. Cool. Now that we have two separate pages, let's work on having like a shared or universal header that all pages use, and like a shared or universal footer that all pages use. Luckily, Next.js makes that really easy. In fact, it almost enforces it for you. So if you go back into your text editor, not in the login folder, but just in the root of the app folder, you can see this file named layout.js, and you and I did not manually create this file. The framework created this file for us when we created our homepage. Now, if you jump into layout.js, this is the skeleton that will be used for all pages on our site, and then children represents like the current dynamic page that you've navigated to. So having a universal header and footer would be as easy as like after the body tag, but before, the curly brackets children, you could say like header goes here. And then, before the closing body tag, but after children, you could say like footer goes here. Give that a save, go back, and there you have it. It's that easy. So I can go to the login page. Cool, they persist. So the dynamic content sort of just gets swapped right here. And before we go any further, just to let you in on a little tip, if you use emit tab triggers, like if you wanted like a heading level 2 and you wanted to hit tab, that won't work in this file in VS Code because it ends in .js. So to fix that, all you would need to do is just rename the file. Instead of layout.js, name it layout.jsx. Now if I go back or reopen up that file, now I should indeed have emit tab triggers. Cool. So maybe above the dynamic area right here, why don't we have like a header element? And for now, let's just say like our Haiku app. And then for the footer, let's just have, like a footer element and say for now, just like the word footer. Cool, so nothing too exciting. But from here, let's take a quick break from Next.js specifically, and let's try to work on styling a little bit. Like, let's get the basic header, main content footer looking good visually. So how do you integrate CSS in Next.js? Let's start, and I'll show you how you could write like your own vanilla CSS, but I'm not actually going to do that in this video. Ultimately, I'm going to use Tailwind, but first, here's how you would apply traditional global CSS. So back in our editor, in the root of your app folder, so not like our project folder as a whole, but just inside of app, I would say new file, and you could name it anything, but let's name it like global.css. Okay, for now, let's just say like, target the body and say font family should be sans serif. Cool, so you can give that a save. Now that will not load by default. What we need to do is go into our layout file, and up at the very top of this file, just say this with me, say import quotes, and then // for the directory you're already in, right? Like layout and CSS live in the same folder, and then just pull in, global.css. So I haven't saved it yet. So notice back in the browser, it's still using like Times New Roman or like, a serif font. But as soon as I hit save, whoops, I thought that would have refreshed for me. What if I perform a hard refresh? I think I just ran into a random bug, but if you run into the same bug, so it was not loading my CSS. What I had to do is actually in my command line, stop the server. So press Control-C down in your terminal, and then just fire it back up again with npm run dev. Cool. The idea though here is that it should auto refresh your CSS. Like you shouldn't even have to manually click the reload icon when you're using Next.js. So like now in my CSS, if I say like color orange, as soon as I hit save, yeah, you get the idea. Like I didn't even have to click reload. Awesome. Perfect. Now that we have our CSS file up and running, I'm actually going to delete everything in here. So just an empty canvas because I want to use Tailwind. So let's spend the next few minutes integrating Tailwind into our project. If you Google for how to install Tailwind Next.js, the first link from the official Tailwind CSS website is great. Let's scroll through this page. We don't need this first step because we already have a Next.js app. So we would just want this line, npm install Tailwind post CSS auto prefixer. So I'll just select that. Down in my command line, I'll press Control-C to stop this task. Just paste in your clipboard, press enter. And then let's go back to the documentation. And then after that one finishes, we'll want this npx tailwind init. So just copy that, paste it into your clipboard, press enter. Cool. Now the next step back in the documentation, we just need to go into our Tailwind config and point towards all of the templates that Next.js would be using. So I would just select this entire like content array, copy that into my clipboard, go into tailwind.config.js and just replace the empty content array. So just paste that in. Let's give that a save. Let's see what other steps there are. Yeah, and then the final step is to just copy these 3 lines into our CSS file. So I would just copy that, go into our global.css, paste it in, hit save, and let's give this a test. So if you, in your command line, say npm run dev, let's go back to our website and manually refresh. Normally you won't need to manually refresh, maybe just because we changed our configuration, but from here on out, you shouldn't have to refresh. Cool, so let's test this out. Let's make sure it's working. If you go into layout, inside our header, maybe let's drop down and have like, maybe like a heading level 3 that says our app, and specifically give it like a class name of maybe like text blue 500. Let's give that a save. Cool. So there you can see the color. Now, really quick, I wanted to point out that notice I didn't just say class equals like with normal HTML and CSS. Class is a reserved word in JavaScript, and because we're in a JSX file, this isn't literally HTML yet. It has to be transpiled from JSX into HTML. So instead of just class, you have to say class uppercase N, so class name. Cool. Now, also in this video, I don't just want to use Tailwind by itself. Lately, I've been a big fan of Daisy UI. We don't need to get into all the opinions of is this tool good or bad, or should you use it for all of your projects. Just within the context of the project we're working on here, it's going to save us from having to type out a lot of extra classes. Right? It basically gives you some nice defaults to start with in Tailwind. So let's click How to Use, and let's just walk through the installation. Cool. So the first thing is just to install it from npm. So let's copy that into our clipboard. I'll press Control-C to stop my task, paste that in. Cool. If we go back to the documentation, I think there's only like one more step. Yep, now we just go into our Tailwind config and just add this in the plugins area. So you could copy and paste that, but I'll just type it out. It's really simple. You just go into Tailwind config. Notice your plugins array is empty. And then in that empty array, you would just require, quotes, Daisy UI. Go ahead and save that. And let's start up our server again. So npm run dev. I had way too many files open. Let's start clean. Cool. So now go into layout.jsx. And now just as a quick demo to show you like what Daisy UI gets us, we would probably actually use the Next.js link element, but just for a super quick demo, like an A element, right? And then like if this was a link to your login page, normally with Tailwind, let's go back to our site. Normally to style this into something that actually looks like a button, you would have to manually spell out a lot, like inline block, padding, rounded corners, all that. But with Daisy UI, you can literally just give it a class of like btn, btn-primary, and you're off to the races. Now, let's not get into the philosophical debates of whether that's going against the whole point of Tailwind in the first place. That's really not for the context of this video. In this video, the idea is that this is going to let us build something that looks nice very quickly. And actually, even faster than typing things in like, btn, if you visit the official Daisy UI website, and then, we can click on components, or you can use their search feature. But if you just search for navbar, click on that. They have this great component named navbar, and they have different variants of it. But if you scroll down, I really like this one. So it's called like navbar with menu and submenu. And better yet, not even just HTML. You can click on JSX and click this icon right here. It's in your clipboard. So now we're just one paste away. Check it out. Back in our layout JSX, let's maybe just inside the header, like keep the overall semantic header tag, but then just paste in your clipboard. Let's save that and see what that gets us. Cool, so you can hover over these buttons. This is a drop-down menu. We don't actually need the drop-down menu, but you can see how quick and easy it is to get this up and running. Let's start customizing it. So like this headline could say like our Haiku app. And then I don't need the drop-down on that other link. So in the second list item, we don't need this entire details area. You could just have like another link, right? And better yet, let's just set this up to be a real next link to our login page. So up at the very top of this file, I would just go ahead, let the CSS be the first import, but then I would say like import link from next/link. And then down here, inside this list item, let's just have, an uppercase link and say log in. And the href would just be /login. Cool, for now we only need the one list item, but in the future, a little bit later in this video, we can add other items like create post or log out, so on and so forth. Let's change our main logo area to also, instead of an A element, be a link element. And let's give it an href that points to just, slash, like the home URL. Whoops, and then the login should be /login. So you can give that a save. So now I should be able to click on this. Awesome, it takes me to the login page. I can click this to go back. Cool. I do want to set things up though so that this isn't just using the full available width. Let me show you what I have in mind instead. So maybe on my overall header, I want that to have like a light gray background. So I'll say like class name, maybe like BG gray 100. And I'll also give that a slight shadow. And then this inner div that we pasted in, temporarily just cut that into your clipboard. I want an inner wrapper div, so you could say like div dot, and let's give it a class of just container, hit tab, give it a second class of like MX auto so it's centered. And then inside of that, you could just paste your clipboard back in. Cool, so that already gets us this. Whoops, I'd probably go ahead and remove this BG base 100 from the navbar div. Perfect. Now let's go ahead and set up the main content area. So it should have like, a good amount of vertical padding or margin. And then we can also set up our footer area. So the main area is easy enough. In layout, just find this area. Currently it's, curly brackets children. And all I would do there is just sort of wrap that in a main tag, move the closing tag to be after it. And then on the opening tag, it's as simple as just saying class name. Let's go with like container, MX auto, and then give it a bit of padding. So you can save that. Cool. I mean, that already gets us something that looks nice. And then the footer is going to be very simple. Here's what I would do. On the opening footer tag, I would say like class name equals, let's go with text gray 400. Let's tell it to be centered. Let's tell it to be small, or XS for extra small, and give it a bit of vertical padding. And then inside that footer element, let's drop down and have a paragraph tag. Then you can just say like copyright and then @ copy for the copyright symbol. Let's output the real dynamic year. So in React or in JSX in our template here, to do something dynamic, it's square brackets. And then we can just create a new instance of the JavaScript date class, look inside that with dot, and call the method of get full year, parentheses to call it. Outside of the curly brackets, let's just say like dash, like all rights reserved. Cool. So if you save that, beautiful. Now that things look decent visually, let's sink our teeth into a substantial and rewarding goal. So before we can have users log into an account, we would first need to let them sign up, or create an account in the first place. So yes, a bit later in the video, we can set up the login page, but first, right now, let's set up our home page. So let me go back to the home. Let's set up this homepage area to be a registration form where users can create an account. In other words, let's learn how to work with HTML forms and server actions within the context of Next.js. So back in VS Code, let's jump into our home page. So the file that just lives in app, not in the login folder, just the root page.jsx. And here's what I would do. Let's get rid of everything inside of our React fragment, or if you had this as just an empty div tag instead, that's totally fine. It really doesn't make a difference. But I'd probably start with, like a paragraph and say like don't, that's the symbol for an apostrophe, don't have an account, question mark, and then maybe a strong tag that says create one. Let's give that opening P tag a few class names. Not plural, just class name equals. Let's center the text. Let's have it be text-2XL. And let's say text gray, maybe like 600. And give it some margin on the bottom. All right, now below that, let's have an HTML form. So you can just type form and hit tab. Now, the action attribute is very important, but we're going to circle back to that in just a minute. For now, you can leave it blank or just put like a placeholder value in there, like a dash or a dot. We'll deal with that in a few minutes. But inside the form, let's just start building out where you can fill in your username and choose a password. Let's wrap the first input inside of a div that has a class of MB3, for margin bottom 3. Inside the div, I'd want an input element, but this is where Daisy UI can save us a lot of time, because instead of spelling out like 12 different classes on the input, check this out. If you just go into Daisy UI's documentation, and if we search for input, so text input, on this new page, there's lots of different styles you can choose from, but towards the top, just this second option, it's called text input with border. I like the look of this. So if you just click on JSX, you click this icon in the top right to copy it into your clipboard. Now you can just paste it in. So it's not rocket science, but that way I didn't have to spell out any of these styles. So Daisy UI has a few class names that it has already created and set up. Now, things like this are just generic Tailwind classes, and then these are from Daisy UI. But either way, just that alone, if we save that and refresh, cool. I think that looks really nice. When you click on it, it sort of activates. This is great. Why don't we center our form horizontally, like in the middle of the screen? So on the opening form tag, I would just say, class name equals, and then let's give it a max width of extra small, and then use MX Auto. Cool. Let's customize this field a little bit. So I'm going to tell it to use autocomplete and set that to be off. And then let's change the placeholder. Instead of type here, it can just say username. And then before we forget, eventually we're going to submit this form to our server or our backend action. And in that case, we're going to need this to have a name. So let's be sure to give it a name attribute of username. Cool. Now let's just duplicate this div that has an input. So the next one can obviously be the password. So I would change the name to password. For type, set this to password so users just see asterisks instead of exposing their password to anyone walking by. Let's change the placeholder to password. Okay, and then below that, let's have the submit button. So still in the form, but below that div, I would just have a button. Let's have the text say like create account. And then we just need to give it a few classes, actually just 2 classes. Even just BTN alone would get you this, but then if you wanted to have a splash of color, you could say BTN primary or secondary. You can check out the Daisy UI documentation. You can choose different color themes, but essentially you can choose between colors that all work well together by just using primary, secondary, so on and so forth. Cool. So now that our form looks nice, let's talk about server actions. Like if we filled in some data and tried to submit this to the server, well, clearly nothing happens. I mean, this is just at this point in time, just a traditional HTML form. So it's going to try to perform a GET request, and you can see that in the address bar. Let's go back to the home page to clear that out. So now the question is, I said we would circle back to this. On the opening tag, the action, this is very important. We don't just want a dot or a dash. Instead, we want to somehow point towards a Next.js server-side action. So the first step is to go create a server action, and then we can import it at the top of this file. So right now, let's go create that server action. You could create it anywhere, right? Like in any folder or file. But just so you and I are staying organized and on the same page, why don't we create a folder in the root of our project folder? So like not even inside of app, just in the root. So new folder. And let's name it, you could name it anything, I'm just making this up, but let's name it like actions. And then inside that folder, again, you could name this pizza.js or unicorn.js. The name doesn't matter, but why don't we call it like, I'm just going to call it usercontroller.js. The idea is that all of my server-side actions that have to do with, creating a user account, logging in, logging out, anything that has to do with a user can go in this file. So, I can have multiple actions inside of this file. The first thing we need to do in our new file is explicitly say quotes, use server, right? These are server-side actions, so we need to spell this out. Cool. After that, we're free to just start spelling out or exporting functions. So, you might have one for logging in, one for logging out. Let's have one for creating a new account. So I would say like export const, and you can name it pizza or unicorn, but I'm going to name it register. And it needs to be an async function. A server action must be an async. So we say async function, parentheses, curly brackets. And just to prove to ourselves that this is server side, let's say console.log, hello, this is from the server. Or to be clear, let's say like this is executing on the server. Cool. So this will not console.log into your browser. It's going to console.log, down in VS Code or your terminal. And then before we close this out, let's return just an example object with a little bit of data. So an object, let's say like sky color is blue, comma, grass color is green. All right, let's give that a save. And now back in our home page, page.jsx, up at the very top of our file, let's import curly brackets because we don't want to just load the entire file. We want to make a specific export, available from a specific variable name. So we named it register and then from. Now, a little bit later in this video, we can learn about a cleaner way of spelling out paths, when you're importing a file. But for now, the quick and dirty solution is to just say .. go up a folder out of the app folder, go into actions, and then grab user controller. Cool. Now down in our form for the action, instead of quotes, it would actually be action equals curly brackets, for like a JavaScript expression, a dynamic value. And you guessed it, it would just be our register function. So if you save that, and then you shouldn't even need to refresh. But before I submit the form, notice that in VS Code, we don't see anything. It's just, 200 requests. But as soon as I click this to submit the form, if you go in VS Code, there you see it, console.log. Hello, this is executing on the server, right? And you could click it, 3 more times, and there you go. You get the idea. So now let's take things a step further. Yes, we can perform server-side actions like looking up data in a database or storing new data in a database, so on and so forth. But now the question is, how can we access this bit of data, this object, on the client side? Because you could imagine, if someone enters a username that's only like 0 characters, like if they don't enter a valid form, how do you do validation? We would want this form to be able to receive this data. In other words, like let's try to log sky color and grass color. Like let's log this object in Chrome or in your browser's console, client side. Now, just so you understand why we're doing what we're doing, imagine that instead of like sky color and grass color, we said like username field error. Your username is too many characters long, or like password field error. Your password is not enough characters long, right? And you're going to want that data client side. So the first step to making this happen is to convert our form to be a client component. In the newest versions of Next, your components are not client-side by default. You have to sort of opt into that. So here's what I would do. In the root of our project folder, so not an app, just in the root, let's create a new folder. And you could name it anything, but I'm going to name it components. And then in that folder, let's create a new file. Again, you can name it anything, but let's go with like register form.jsx. Cool. In this brand new file, let's begin with quotes and say use client. We are opting into a client-side component, and now we can just, export default function, register form, parentheses, curly brackets, return some parentheses, and then in order to save some typing, just go back into your home page. Cool. So what I would do though is just grab this form, so the opening form tag to the closing form tag, cut that into your clipboard, and then go into registerform.jsx, and in this return parentheses, just paste it in. Cool. Let's also move over the line where we're importing register. That should technically now be in this file. So back in page.jsx, let's just cut this register line and move it in to this file. Make sure it sits below use client, just like this. Cool. And now in page.jsx, we can import. So we can say import register form from, and then just go up out of the app folder, go into components folder, and grab register form. Now down here below the paragraph where it was, you could just say, just use it like an element. So register form, self-closing. Let's give that a save. Be sure to save your new register form component. Cool. So that didn't achieve anything on its own, but now we have a client-side component, and now it's very easy. Let's get back to the task at hand. The whole goal here is how can we access this data that the server sends back when we submit the form? Like I want to see this data in the Chrome DevTools, in the Chrome console, right? Like down here. So here's how you can make that happen. In our new register form client component, up at the top, we just need to import a couple really useful tools. So import curly brackets, let's say use form state, comma, use form status. And we're going to import those from not Next.js, but from React-DOM. Cool. Now let's go use them. So in our function, but before we return any JSX, so right here, let's say const square brackets, and I'm just making up these names. So these names are not made up. These need to be exact, but down here we're making up variable names. Let's say form state, comma, form action, and set that to equal use form state, parentheses to call it. In these parentheses, you give it two things. So the first thing is the action that you want to use for when this form gets submitted. So we know that that is register. And then the second thing you give it is the starting data. I'll explain this in just a minute, but for now, let's just set our starting data to like an empty object. Cool. Now the final step is down here on the form. Don't just say register. Instead, set this to form action. In other words, use form state is sort of like wrapping our register function, but now we have this really convenient setup where anytime this action actually occurs, it's going to update form state with the data that the server is sending back to us. I totally promise this is confusing until you see it in action. Before we save our file, let's just say, below the console, let's say console.log form state, right? We want to see that in Chrome's console. So you can save this. Make sure your Chrome dev tools are open up. I'll refresh just so I have a clean slate. So you're seeing an empty object because that's what we said like the starter or default value is. But as soon as I submit the form, absolutely beautiful. Let me zoom in down there for you. You see the data that came from the server side, sky color and grass color. Awesome. At this point, we now have everything we need. We have the client side features, we have the server side features. So let's actually make this come to life. Let's start actually receiving the real typed in values that the user is submitting and start validating them. So for example, like a username must be between 3 and 30 characters long, or a password must be between 12 and 50 characters long, so on and so forth. So here's how you do that. Let's go back into our server action, so in user controller. Let's hollow out the function so we don't need console.log or that return for now. Let's start fresh, and let's start by just creating a variable named errors and just set it to an empty object. The idea here is that if there's a problem with the username or password, I want to push like a new message onto this object. Now, right away, before we go any further, I want to say that at this part of the lesson, this is very opinionated. This is my opinion on how you should handle, validation and so on and so forth. A really common opinion is to use something called ZOD. But in order to keep this video as simple as possible, I don't want to introduce any, third-party dependencies that I don't absolutely need to. So this is just sort of my own like homebrewed way of validating data. But I'd probably start by just building out like our user I'm just making this name up, as an object and just spelling out the actual properties I'm interested in. So I would say like username. And how do we actually get that? Well, when we create our function, we want to have two parameters. So we're going to say previous state, comma, form data. So now we can access the value that the user typed into the form from this form data. So check it out. We could get that string value by just saying form data and call its get method, and then the name of the field was username. Let's say comma. Let's also have, password, and that would be form data get password. Cool. Next up, because I'm using plain JavaScript instead of TypeScript, I do just want to go ahead and make sure that these values are indeed strings and not objects or something more malicious. So what I would do is just say like if type of our user.username, if that does not equal string, well, then I'm just going to set it to an empty string. So our user.username should equal just empty quotes. I would do the same thing for password too. So like change this to password, change this to password. The real reason I'm doing this is because a little bit later in this video, we're going to be storing our users and haikus in a MongoDB database. And in the world of MongoDB, you don't have SQL injections like you have in the SQL world, but instead, if a user can pass along an object when you are expecting a string, well, then you can have some security troubles in the MongoDB world. So I'm just really making sure it's just a string. Cool. I'd probably also go ahead and trim off any white space at the start or end of those strings. So I'd say like our user.username equals, and then just trim. So our user.username, call the trim method. I do the same thing for password. So just change both instances there to password. Okay, and now I would actually just start performing my validation checks. Let's start with if the username is less than 3 characters long. Like it must be at least 3 characters. So I would say if, the condition would be like our user.username.length. If that is less than 3, now you could have curly brackets after your parentheses, but if you stay on a single line, you don't need the curly brackets. So if this is true, I would just look on our errors object, and it's currently an empty object, and I would just say errors dot, and then I would just add a new property of it to it called username, and I would say like username must be at least 3 characters. And let's set up the opposite rule. So I would just duplicate that line, and I would say if it is greater than 30, and then I would change the message to username cannot exceed 30 characters. All right, now in just a few minutes, we can also go ahead and add some validation for the password. But for now, let's test this out. So essentially what I'm going to do is look to see if there are any errors or if we are error-free. So I'd say if errors.username pipe or errors.password. So if either of those are true, that means we have a problem. There's a validation error. And in that case, I just want to return, let's return just an object. Errors can be our errors object. And comma, we can also set like success to false. These are not Next.js terms. I'm just making this up. I mean, you could have set sky color to be blue. We put that back though to just success false. Okay, and then down here, if this code where my cursor is now, if this ever executes, that means this didn't execute, right? Because return is going to halt the further execution of the function. So if we reach down here, that means we don't have any validation errors. So down here, we'd want to do a few things. I'm just writing a comment to myself. First of all, let's start by storing a new user in the database. And then let's also like log the user in by giving them a cookie. Now we can perform both of these actions in maybe like 5 or 10 minutes from now, but let's just go ahead and return maybe just an object where success is true. Awesome. Let's save this and head back to the browser or the front end. I'll refresh just to make sure and open up your your console. And let's test this out. So if I try to have a username that's only 2 characters long and click create account, cool, we see success false. You can click on this to expand it. Username must be at least 3 characters. But if I make it super long and like over 30 characters long and submit, scroll down in the console, awesome, you get the idea. However, if I have 0 problems, right, this doesn't violate any of the validation rules. I can click create account. All we see is success true. Beautiful. Now let's improve the user experience. So if there is a problem, right, like if this is not long enough, let's actually display like a little message right here that says, hey, your username's not long enough. With the way that we've set things up, implementing that is going to be really easy. So we just go back into our register form.jsx, and we already have the current form state within this context, right? That's why we're logging it to the console. So then down here in our JSX, check it out. Here's the input for username, still in that wrapper div, so literally in that div, but below the input. Let's do this. Curly brackets in JSX to do something dynamic. And then I'm going to spell out a condition. So I'm going to say form state dot errors, and then question mark makes it optional. So like if this doesn't exist, we won't receive an error. But I'll say dot and look inside it for the username property. So essentially, like if form state.errors.username exists, that means we have a problem. So after the condition, now we can say and then parentheses. In those parentheses, you can drop down, and now we can have JSX that will only render if this is true. So you could spell out your own div or paragraph, but the whole point of Daisy UI is to save us from reinventing the wheel. So on the Daisy UI website, if you search for alert, they have a really great alert component. I mean, it's not rocket science. We could have styled this ourselves, but it's really quick to just come in here, and it's up to you if you want the yellow warning or the red error. I know that technically in our case it's a validation error, but that just looks kind of harsh to me. So I might go with the yellow warning. It's totally up to you, but just click on JSX, whichever one you want, click copy, and then just, in the parentheses, paste in your clipboard. And then I would just change this text in this span to be curly brackets for something dynamic, and it's just form state dot errors question mark dot username. So if we save this, and let me refresh just to sort of clear out any state. And if I try to submit a username that's 1 character long, Perfect. If I try to submit a username that's over 30 characters long, absolutely beautiful. Now, the really cool part here is, even though this is using sort of a client-side SPA experience, check this out. If you open up your DevTools and press Command-Shift-P or Control-Shift-P and say Disable JavaScript, so now client-side JavaScript is disabled. I can refresh, and if I try to submit a username that's just 1 character long, yes, we haven't set it up so that I keep my old sticky value, but we see that exact same validation message. So in other words, whether you have client-side JavaScript or not, this is a great experience. So this isn't like a clunky, manually spelled out fetch request inside of a use effect like you might have done with React in the past. Next.js really just takes, a form submit, and it works even without client-side JavaScript. Cool. At this point, let's go ahead and set up this exact same condition right below the password field. So I would literally just take the curly brackets for this entire error and just duplicate it below the password input, and then just select username here, press Control or Command D to select the next instance of it down here, and just change it to password. Let's give that a save, and now all we need to do is go into user controller and just spell out any and all remaining validation criteria for username and password. Actually, really quick, before we do that, I don't want to forget to re-enable client-side JavaScript. So if I don't do that right now, I'll probably forget. So Command or Control-Shift-P, and then just enable, yeah, there it is, the first one, enable JavaScript. Let's refresh, cool. Let me just revisit the homepage and refresh. Cool, we're back to a world where client-side JavaScript exists. All right, now let's finish spelling out our validation logic. Let's make sure you can only use A through Z, 0 through 9 for your username, right? Like you can't have any weird, like exclamation or hashtag or anything like that in your username. We could spell out our regular expression test for that, like in this function, but I usually like to just create a totally separate function, and we don't need to export it because we don't need it from any other file. So like up here outside of our function, you could just say like function, let's name it like is alphanumeric, parentheses, curly bracket. So let's give it a parentheses, right? Like you give it some sort of input, and then I'll just say like const regex equals, so / caret, square brackets, and then at the end, let's say asterisk, $, / Now in the square brackets, by the way, I don't claim to have memorized regular expressions, so I'm not going to fully, this has to do with like, make sure this matches the start of the string, make sure this matches the end of the string, but I'd be lying if I said I have irregular expressions completely memorized. Now, the only part of this that I do have memorized is that I know that in the square brackets, you can spell out what you're trying to allow. So we're going to allow like A through Z lowercase, and then we're also going to allow A through Z uppercase, and then we're going to allow 0 through 9. That's it. If it's anything that does not match this, well, then it's not a match. So then we're just going to return either true or false, and the way that that's going to be dynamic is by using our regular expression, calling its test method, and then just giving it the incoming string that you're testing. So now down here, we can just spell out a new rule. We can say like if, and then let's just call our function is alphanumeric, and just give it our user.username. And then at the start of this, I would say exclamation. So like, if this is not true, then we have a problem, in which case just say errors.username equals and say you can only use A through Z and 0 through 9. Cool. Let's give that a save and test it out. So like if I try to register with like AB exclamation hashtag, perfect. There's that validation. But if I just say my name is ABC, beautiful. Next, let's set up a custom message in case you submit this with no username value whatsoever. Instead of saying like must be at least 3, let's say just simply you must provide a username. So here's what I would do. As the very final rule, I would just say like if our user.username double equal signs to check for equality. If that's just an empty string, then just say errors.username equals you must provide a username. While I'm at it, I'll actually probably improve this message and just say usernames can only contain letters and numbers. Cool. Let's test this out. So if I put in a name that's too short, cool. If I put in a name that's too long, beautiful. But if I provide a name that's just empty, beautiful. Now let's set up the rules for the password. So most of these we can just copy. I'm actually just going to copy these 4 rules for username, and then just below the username rules, just paste in your clipboard. We don't need the alphanumeric check for a password. A password can contain any characters. Let me change all this .username to password. So I would select and this is a VS Code trick, but I would select username, and then I would press Control D or Command D on Mac and press it again and again, and just keep pressing it until you've selected all these instances, and then just change it to password. Now I did want these, and then press escape on your keyboard to get out of that multi-cursor mode, but I did want these ones to be uppercase, so I would just, fix that. You must provide a password. This should not be username. Cool, and then the only difference is that a password I think should be at least 12 characters long, and maybe it shouldn't be over 50 characters long. And then I'll just change the messages. So this should be 12, this will be 50. Cool, so you can test that out really quick. So a password that's too short, a password that is too long, a password that is empty. Cool, but if we provide something that is entirely valid, so ABC and then like QWERTY and submit, there's no error messages, but more importantly, what's getting logged, or the form state is simply success true. So in other words now, on the server side, if we reach this area, this means there were no errors. So on the server side, we are safe to save that user into a database and give them a secure cookie, with either a session ID, or in our case, we're going to use a JSON web token. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Before we can log the user in, we need to focus on the database, right? We need to remember their username and their hashed password and save that permanently somewhere. In this video, I'm going to use MongoDB. If you've never used MongoDB before, that's okay. Just Google for like MongoDB Atlas. You can sign up for a completely free account. You shouldn't even need to enter a credit card or anything. It's just completely free. So you can pause this video and then resume it once you have your free MongoDB Atlas account. The reason I recommend this is because then the database isn't just on your local computer. So at the end of this video, when we want to push our application up onto the web, well, your database will already be up on the web. So MongoDB Atlas is a database in the cloud. It's awesome. It's great to use. I really recommend it. I am not sponsored or endorsed by MongoDB in any way. Now, I'm not going to walk through the process of signing up, and the very first time you log in, I think you'll manually need to create a cluster and maybe, create your first database. So I'm going to assume that you can figure that out. What I am going to walk through with you is how in the world do you connect, your MongoDB cloud database to your application. So there's a few things you need to do. In your MongoDB dashboard, if you click on database in the left-hand menu, when you see your cluster, we're going to click on connect. The first thing we need to do is allow access from any IP address. Now, I realize in the real world, for mission critical, Fortune 500 companies, that probably wouldn't be the best idea. It would actually make sense to only allow specific IP addresses to connect to the database. But in our case, this way you don't need to figure out wherever you're going to host your app or your own personal IP. I would just make things easy for yourself right now and just click allow access from anywhere. So the wildcard for that is like, 0.0.0/0. Just click add IP address. Cool. Now you will need to probably go create a database user, and you're going to have to select a username and password, and that's different than your MongoDB account, like your email username and password. So just write this down or, store this somewhere where you can easily remember it, because you're going to need it in another couple of seconds. Anyways, at this point, we're looking for a connection string. So click choose a connection method. I would just click on drivers, and we're going to be using Node.js. So essentially what you're looking for is this down here, this connection string. So it starts with MongoDB plus symbol SRV://. So you will need to enter in your own password into this string. Like you'll need to select this into your clipboard. So you can just go ahead and do that right now. Select that value into your clipboard, and let me show you what you're going to do with it. In VS Code, in the root of our folder, you need to create a new file with this exact name. It needs to be .env. So .env. In that new file, you could make up any variable name. It could be pizza, it could be unicorn, but just so you and I are on the same page, let's call it connection string. And make sure you're spelling it correctly. You wouldn't believe how many times people get this like one character off and then can't figure out why their database isn't working. So connection string, all uppercase, equals, and then paste in your clipboard. Okay, so this should be your database username. Yours will be different than mine. But now you are going to manually need to go into your connection string, and where you see less than DB underscore password greater than, get rid of all of that, and instead just actually type in your real database password. Cool. Now we just need to make one more change to this connection string towards the very end of it. So after the mongodb.net / and before this question mark, so right where my cursor is blinking, make up a database name. I'll call it like Amazing Haiku App. So you don't need to use this exact same name as me, but you get the idea. At this point, let's go ahead and save this file and close it. And now we have everything we need to get permission to actually access the database. Now let's actually just connect the dots. Let's open up an ongoing connection to the database from within our Next application. Now, I don't want to spend the next half an hour learning about the most optimal way of doing that, so we're not going to spell it out line by line. We're just going to borrow some code from a GitHub gist of mine. But I will explain briefly what the file is doing. So let's not messy up this file. Let's create a totally separate file that we can just call from any from any component in our app. So in the root of our project, let's create a new folder. You could name it anything, pizza, unicorn. I'm going to name it like library, or lib, just short for library. The idea is I'm going to keep like reusable functions in this folder. So in this new folder, let's create a file, and I'm going to name it db.js. I'm just making up this file name. Now, instead of spelling out exactly line by line, here's what I want you to do. In the description for this video, I'll include a link to this GitHub gist of mine. But from this page, just click on raw, and then just Control or Command A, select everything copied into your clipboard, and your brand new file, just paste it in and hit save. The idea is that this is going to create an ongoing connection to the database in a way that is optimal both for your dev environment and for a production environment. And then it's going to export these functions that we can use from any component. So we're going to use this get collection function throughout our application. Cool. So once you save that file, you can close it. We don't ever need to go into that file again. And let's give this a shot. So now, at this point, back in user controller, if we don't have any errors, then that's the only time this code would function or execute. So let's just try to actually create a new item in the database. Up at the very top of this file, not above use server though. So right about here, let's import that DB tool we just created. So import curly brackets, let's say get collection. I'm not making this up. This is the name of the function we were exporting from the DB file. And that was from, and then quotes, .. to go up out of the actions folder, and then go into the lib folder, and then just db.js. Cool, now let's scroll back down to where we wanted to store a new user in the database, and here's all we need to do. Let's say const users collection, I'm just making this up, equals, and then await get collection. And which collection are we trying to work with? The one that's named users. MongoDB is nice. You don't need to preemptively create your table. Well, it doesn't have tables. Instead of tables, there's collections, but you don't need to preemptively create them. Just trying to work with one and then inserting your first document in one will indeed create it for you. Now on the next line, we can use that. We can just say await users collection, and then look inside it. So dot, and use the insert one method. And now you would just give it an object, with like sky color equals blue. But instead of spelling out an object with curly brackets, we already spelled out our object. We named it our user, and we've been cleaning up the values and validating things so that we know that it has just the exact data that we want. So that's what you can insert. You can just insert our user. Cool. Let's save this and give it a test. So let me go back to my front end. So this is the least confused I've ever been by an error message in my life. We forgot to install the MongoDB driver package. Of course, this is never going to work in a billion years. So go into your command line. You can stop the task, Control-C, and just say npm install MongoDB. Go ahead and press enter. That should be really quick. And then just fire up your dev server again. So npm run dev. Cool. Give that a second to spin up. Let's refresh our home page. Let's try to log or create a user with no validation errors. Click create account. Now, we didn't set up our front end to do anything like redirect you or re-render the page. However, let's go into our MongoDB. So from this database screen, then you would click browse collections right here. I have a lot of different databases, but you might just have the one database. But there it is, amazing Haiku app. It only has one collection named users, but you can click onto that collection. But there it is, username Brad, password QWERTY. Now, right away, before we go any further, I want to let you know you should never, ever, ever in a billion years store a user's password in plain text like this. So the very first thing we're going to do is delete this document, and then we want to hash their password, and I like to use a package called bcrypt. Let me show you what's going on here. You can go ahead and delete that. I mean, I purposely chose a value that's not secure. It doesn't matter if the world knows QWERTY, but here's what we're going to do. Before we save anything into the database, let's write a comment right above that. Let's say like hash password first. So we're going to say const, and actually before we go any further, let's go install the package. So in your command line, press Control-C, say npm install. The name of the package is bcrypt. This is a very popular, excellent package. Go ahead and press enter. Cool, then just start up your server again. So npm run dev. Cool. Now what we're going to do is say const salt equals, and then use bcrypt dot, and then call a method of gen salt sync with 10 passes. Before we forget, let's be sure to import bcrypt at the top of this file. So let's say import bcrypt from quotes bcrypt. Cool, let's scroll back down to where we were using it. So after we've created our salt, right there, I would just modify our user. So I would modify our user.password to equal bcrypt. And then I'm going to use a method of hash sync. And then you give it two things. So A comma B. The first thing you give it is the actual plain text string that you're trying to hash. So that would be our user.password. The second thing you give it is your salt. So just salt. Cool. Now we've already modified our user password, so we don't need to change anything else. Now that's what will get stored in the database. Let's save that and test it out again. So let me refresh the home page to clear out my form. Let me say my name is Barks a lot and my password is QWERTY. Create account. Let's go look in MongoDB. You can click apply or reload. So there's a refresh icon here or the apply button. But there you see it. Now my name is Barks a lot, but I'm not storing the actual password value. So if our database ever got leaked, you're not compromising the security of your users. Cool. A little bit later in this video, we'll learn how to log a user in it, like an existing user, and how to check their attempted password with this hashed value. It's actually really easy, really simple. But before we get to that, now that we've stored the user in the database, if we go back into our user controller, let's go ahead and give them a cookie. The idea here is that if you are logged in, let's show a different homepage, like a dashboard with all of your haikus. But if you visit the same homepage when you're not logged in, you see the registration form. The idea is that we can make that check, like are you logged in or are you a guest? We can make that check by looking for a cookie. If a cookie is present, we know that they're logged in. If a cookie is not present, we know that they're a guest. So back in our user controller, right below this, comment, let's give them a cookie. So you just say cookies, and actually let's begin by making sure that we import this cookies up at the very top of the file. So we would just say import curly brackets to destructure something, cookies from, and then it's next/headers. Cool. Now we can scroll back down towards the very bottom, and let's actually use cookies. So you call cookies, and then the object that it returns has a method. So you can say dot, and then it's called set. We give it two arguments. So A comma B, actually three arguments. Sorry, A, B, C. The first argument is the name of the cookie. Now you could name this anything, but why don't we name it like our Haiku app? The second value is the actual cookie value that you want to store in the browser. Let's circle back to that one in about 10 seconds from now. Or 30 seconds from now, and let's actually focus on the third argument. So instead of a placeholder C, let's say curly brackets, and we're just going to set a few properties. So we absolutely want it to be HTTP only, so we'll set that to true. So this way, JavaScript, client-side JavaScript cannot access our cookie. The cookie will only be accessible when the browser automatically sends it along with each request. I'll also go ahead and set same site to strict. I don't want to go down a cookie rabbit hole, but essentially by setting this to strict, we really don't need to worry about CSRF tokens. Finally, one more property. Let's say max age, and I believe this is measured in seconds, not in milliseconds, but I guess we'll find out. So I would just say let's say we want 24 hours. So I would say 60 times 60, right? There's 60 seconds. in a minute, and then there's 60 minutes in an hour. So that would get us 1 hour, and then I would multiply that by 24. So essentially the cookie will last for 24 hours. Perfect. Now the only thing we need to circle back to is this second argument, the B placeholder. This is the actual value that we want to store in the browser. Now, in this video, I'm not going to use sessions to sort of remember which user is logged in. Instead, I'm going to use the stateless approach that uses something called JSONWebTokens. Check this out. Let's go into our command line, stop the task with Control-C, and then let's install the package. So npm install, and it's named JSONWebToken. Go ahead and press enter. Let's fire up our server again. So npm run dev. All right, now up at the very top of this file, let's import in that new library. So import, and just for short, I'll call it like JWT. Let's set that to import from JSONWebToken, that package we just downloaded. Let's go back down, and now we can use JWT. Now we could probably spell out the code directly here, but to keep our code cleaner, I'd probably define it on the line above this. So I would say like create our JWT value. And I would just create a variable. Doesn't matter what the name is. I'll just call it like our token value and set that to equal, and then use JWT, and it has a method called sign. Now in these parentheses, we're going to give it 2 arguments. So the first is an object with all of the data that you want to be encoded into the string. And then the second argument is your password, or I shouldn't say your password, your secret, and you would need to know that secret in order to be able to decode this value or to verify this value. So what I like to do for my JWT secret is keep it in my .env file. So let's go into .env, and below our connection string, let's say, and you could name it anything, but I'll call it like JWT secret, and make sure you're spelling that correctly. Not that it needs to match mine, but just one of the most common errors I see students make is they will misspell the word secret here and then never be able to figure out why their code is not working. So let's set that to equal. And then I'll just choose like my super secure secret. Doesn't matter, just pick something random that's impossible to guess. So maybe just hit some letters on your keyboard. Cool, so that's really hard to guess. Let's go back into user controller. So then instead of B, this would be process.env all uppercase JWT secret. Cool, now let's just circle back to this object here. What do we want to include? I want to include their user ID. So in other words, like in our database, right? When we just signed up, the document has a username and password field, but it also has an ID field. So I want to store that in the encoded JSON Web Token, so that way when someone's logged in, I know which user specifically is logged in. So here's what we're going to do. In these curly brackets, let's pass along. Now, first of all, you can include as much data in here as you want. Like you could say sky color is blue, comma. Now let's also set like user ID, colon. And for now, let's just say like the number 123. In just a second from now, we can circle back and make sure this is the dynamic database document ID that we just created in our database. But we'll get to that in another minute from now. Let's say comma. We do need to include a property called exp for when this token should expire or no longer be considered valid. So exp colon, and then let's just do this. Let's say 24 hours from now. So we're going to start by saying uppercase math.floor, parentheses to call that, and then say date.now, parentheses on now. And then we're going to divide that by 1,000 because this returns the current date, I believe measured in Unix time, and which is how many milliseconds have passed since the epoch. I don't know. We're getting down a time rabbit hole. But after the parentheses, then I'm just going to add on 24 hours worth of seconds from now. So that would be 60 times 60 times 24. Cool. Now let's circle back to the user ID value, right? We don't want a hard-coded 123. So here's what we're going to do. A couple lines up, when we are inserting 1 into the database, at the start of this line, instead of just having what this returns floating in outer space, let's capture it in a variable here. So at the start of this line, I would just say const, and just make it up like new user equals await that. And then on the next line, we could say const user ID equals new user dot inserted ID, and then convert it to a string, so to string. MongoDB has its own data type for IDs, but this will make sure that it's just a typical JavaScript string. And now we can use that down here. So let's just set user ID to user ID. Cool. Finally, when we set the cookie, let's be sure to not have this B placeholder here. That should now be our token value. Let's give this a save, and to test it out, let's just register a brand new user and see if the cookie gets successfully set. So I'll go back to my application. I'll reset this form or just revisit the home page. And I'll create an account named Meowsalot with a password of QWERTY. Create account. Now, we haven't set up our front end to actually do anything when you submit that, but to make sure that it worked, you would just go into your database, click apply or refresh, and let's just check for that new document in the database. Cool, there's Meowsalot. But more importantly, to make sure that the cookie was created, just open up your dev tool so you can right-click, choose inspect, and instead of elements or console, choose application. If you're using Firefox instead of a Chromium-based browser, I believe it would be under storage instead of application. But then we're just looking for cookies for localhost. And yep, there is our Haiku app. Let me zoom out a little bit here so we can see all the columns. Perfect, so it's HTTP only. We used same site strict, and notice the actual value. This is the interesting part here. So that's the JSON web token that we created. Now, I'm noticing one thing here before we move on. Let's absolutely set secure to be true. I totally forgot about that. So when we're spelling out these properties, let's say secure and set that to true. If you're running this code anywhere other than localhost, if assuming you're on a real production live domain, it will not work unless you're using HTTPS. Right, and that's going to keep your users secure. But for localhost, it will sort of skip that check. Cool. Anyways, from here, let's learn how to use this value. So now, what is the goal? Well, now anytime we visit the home page, our browser still has that cookie. So I'm refreshing. Now, we would want to check to see, does the incoming request have a valid cookie? Is it just a bogus value, or is it a legitimate value that we just signed with our JWT secret? If it's a legitimate cookie, we can show them the logged in dashboard. If it's not, then we can show them this guest, create an account form. So let's write that code that checks for the incoming cookie. Now, you absolutely could write that code directly in your user controller, but I can tell you right now, checking if the incoming cookie is valid or not is something I'm going to be doing over and over again and again in this application. So I want it somewhere where I can recycle it and reuse it. So I'm going to go into my lib folder and create a new file. And let's just name it getuser.js. In this file, I'm going to export an async function named getUser from cookie, parentheses, curly brackets. This is not a meaningful name. I'm just making it up. So you could choose a slightly different name, but just so you and I are on the same page, cool. At the very top of this file, let's import curly brackets cookies from next/headers. Now, in our function, the first thing we want to do is just try to get the cookie. So I'd say const the cookie equals call cookies, and then use its get method. And we named ours I forgot the name, but you can see it right in Chrome, our Haiku app. Cool. So back in our code, our Haiku app. And then you would say dot value. But because the cookie might not exist, we're not only trying to verify the value, but if someone doesn't have a cookie at all yet, I'm going to put a question mark here to sort of make it optional. And this way, if someone doesn't have a cookie, we're not going to run into an error message. Cool. Now on the next line, now that we have that value, right? So whatever this incoming value for that cookie is, we want to verify it. We can't just trust it. If this value is even one character off, it should fail, or I should say it will fail. So how do we verify it and decode it and see what's in it and make sure that it's legitimate? Well, that JWT package has a great function called verify. However, I don't even want to waste a comparison to verify it if there is no cookie. So I'd probably start with an if wrapper and say only if the cookie exists, only then do we want to compare or verify it. So now inside of this, I would just have a try catch block. So try block, catch error block. In the try block, I would say const, and I'm just making this up, but we'll call it decoded. We want to decode that JWT string, and you would say JWT and call verify. In that function call, we're going to give it two things. The first value is the string that you're trying to verify, so that would be the cookie. And then the second thing you give it is your JWT secret. So process.env. and then all uppercase JWT secret. And then below that, let's just return decoded. And then if there's an error, so in the catch block, I would just return null. So now, from anywhere in our application, we can just import this file, and this function will either give us the decoded user object, or the value that we've stored in that JSON web token, or it will give us essentially nothing. Cool. So let's save this file. And then I just realized we don't need to use it in user controller. We need to use it in our home page, right? So the page.jsx that represents our home page, we now want to check and say, hey, if the user's logged in, don't show them the register form. Show them like all of your Haiku collection, like you're logged in. So here's what I would do. At the very top of this file, actually up here, you can see this line is faded. That means we don't need that in this file anymore. Let's import, curly brackets, get user from cookie. And that would be from, quotes, .. go into the lib folder, and then we named it get user. Cool. So now in our function, before we return anything, I would just say const user equals await, and then just call get user from cookie. Oops. And if we're going to use await here, this would need to be an async function. Cool. Now down here, we can just display JSX conditionally. So if you're not logged in, or if user is false, show this. If it's true, show like a welcome message. So I'd probably just say, curly brackets, user, and maybe parentheses, and then let's just have like a paragraph that says, welcome, you are logged in. And then down here, we could say like curly brackets, exclamation user, like if user evaluates to false, ampersand, parentheses, and then just move this JSX to live in that block. So cut it and then paste it right here. Whoops, because there's two elements, you can only have one top level element. So just keep that on your clipboard, undo that. Just have a React fragment or a parent div like this, paste it in. We should be good to go. Let's give that a save. Go back to the home page. Whoops, looks like we're still a guest, even though we should have been logged in, right? We have a valid cookie. Let's see what's going on here. I don't think we have any mistakes in page.jsx, but let's go back into get user. So in our try block, right before const decoded, I'll say like console.log hello. And then, okay, so I see, let me refresh. Yeah, so that's showing up. And then if we move it there, it's not showing up. So, we never imported JWT. So this is failing. So of course it's not going to continue executing the function. So we just need to import JWT up at the top here. So import JWT from, quotes, JSONWebToken. Let's give that a save, and now when we go back to Chrome, hopefully, if it's a lucky day, it looks like we're logged in. Beautiful. You can test this out. If you change this value by even one character, like if I change the first E to be a Z instead, and as soon as I refresh, it looks like I'm a guest. If I put that back to the exact perfectly valid signed to JWT token and refresh, we're back in. Cool. So this is great. When someone creates a new account, we're automatically logging them in. But what about someone who already has an account? How can they log out and log in? Well, let's start building out that functionality. Let's start up in the header. If you're logged in, let's have a log out button up here. In other words, the header should know whether you're logged in or not. So let's work on having a log out button, and then let's set it up so when you click it, it actually logs you out. After that, we can build out the login form. So here's what we're going to do. Let's find the JSX for our header. So currently that's in layout.jsx. But right away, I don't want to perform any sort of dynamic action inside of layout.jsx. I want layout.jsx to be as fast and lightweight as possible. I like to split out any sort of complexity or dynamic checks into separate subcomponents. So what I'm going to do, in the components folder, let's create a new file and name it header.jsx. In that new file, just export default function header parentheses curly brackets, return a bit of JSX. You can drop down, and then in layout, just grab your entire, from the starting header element down to the closing, just copy that or cut that into your clipboard, paste it in the new file, hit save, and then in this file, up at the top, we would just import it. So import header from quotes .. components header, and then we would use that down here, just a self-closing uppercase header. Cool. Whoops, that's actually a great warning. So we no longer need link to be imported in layout. I'm just going to copy that into my clipboard. We instead now need it at the top of header.jsx. Give that a save. We're back in business. Now, in this new component, I'm going to perform a dynamic check. I want to see if the current user is logged in or not. So I would just import curly brackets get user from cookie, and that is from quotes .. lib get user. within our header function, but before we return anything, I'll just say, const user equals await get user from cookie parentheses to call it. This would need to be an async function. And now I just want to output different JSX depending on whether you're logged in or not. So I would just take this list item for the login link. I would just cut that into my clipboard. And I would say like curly brackets, if user is true, ampersand, ampersand, parentheses, and then paste that in. And then right below that, I have curly brackets, exclamation if there is no user, if you're not logged in, ampersand, ampersand, parentheses, paste it in. Cool. So this one makes sense. If you're not logged in, show people a login link. If you are logged in, we would want this to say log out. Now you could set this up to be a link, but typically you don't want a link that someone could get tricked into clicking to log someone out. Not that that would be a huge security threat. Like they're not performing, they're not like giving away all their bank money to someone else. They're just getting logged out. But still, you don't want anything that changes application state usually to be on just a link. You would instead want it to be a form that submits a post request. So instead of a link here, inside this list item, I would probably just have a form. So form, hit tab. We'll circle back to the action in just a moment. But inside the form, let's just have a button and it says log out. And on the form tag, I would give that a class name of btn and then btn-neutral. Let's save that and see what that visually gets us. Perfect. So I'm logged in, so I see log out, but in this browser, I'm not logged in. Nice. Back in the browser where I am logged in, let's bring this log out button to life. So here's what I would do. Back in user controller, we already have one function called register. Let's just create a function. You guessed it, named logout. So export const logout equals async function, parentheses, curly brackets. In the body of this function, I'm just going to call cookies and then use its delete method. And we named ours our Haiku app. After that, I would want to go ahead and redirect the user back to the home page because they might have been on like the create post screen or some sort of screen that only logged in users should see. So to redirect someone, it's really simple. Up here, we would just import, curly brackets, redirect from next/navigation. Then after we delete the cookies, we can just say redirect back to / for the home page. Let's give that a save, go back into header, and then we want to use that as the action for this form tag. So up at the very top of this file, we would need to import that. So I would say import, curly brackets, log out from quotes, / actions, user controller. And then the action name would just be not quotes, but curly brackets for something real or dynamic and just say log out. Let's give this a try. So back in Chrome, if we refresh, you can see I am indeed logged in, but if I click this button, perfect. I'm immediately logged out. Now, intuitively, let's go ahead and set up the page for when you actually click on login. We have a form where users can type in their name and password and log in. Now, in terms of design, the login form is going to look almost identical to the, create an account form. So here's what I would do. Let's just go find that create an account form so we can just reuse almost all of that JSX. So in your components, we're looking for register form. I would just find the opening form tag. So here it is. And I would just select all the way down until the closing form tag, copy that into your clipboard. And then we just need to go into our login folder and go into page.jsx. And I'd probably keep a heading up at the very top, maybe like a heading level 2. And just say like log in. And let's give it a little bit of styling. I'll say like class name, maybe text center, text 2XL. Text gray 600 and maybe margin bottom 5. But then below that, we don't need the paragraph. Below that, just paste in your clipboard. Okay, we don't need the button at the bottom to say create account. It could say like log in or sign in or maybe just submit the form. But let's go ahead and save that and see if we get any errors or if it's, yep, we do indeed have an error. Perfect, that points us in the natural next step direction, the action of the form. So that was from the create an account form and action. So now we would need a form action that logs you in. let's go back and actually borrow the code that sets up form action. Let me explain. If you go back into register form, this is where we just copied that HTML or JSX from. I just want this line of code that goes at the top of the component function. So it's, form state and form action, use form state. Let's just copy that line. And then back in our login page.jsx, before return, so right here, I would just paste that in. And then at the very top of this file, we are going to need to import, quotes, use form state from, and then it's react-dom. Cool. So now all we need to change is, instead of this being register, we need to create an action called login. So it doesn't exist yet, so we're going to change this to login. That's going to give us an error message, right? There is no function named login yet. But now, whoops, we're seeing a message that this component needs to be client. So up at the top of that login file, you would just say, quotes, use client. Perfect. And there's the error I was expecting to see. So now we just need to go create a server-side action named login. So we're just going to check the username and password with the database, see if it's a match. You either let the user in or you reject their attempt. So let's do this. Let's go into actions, into user controller. And you guessed it, let's just export a brand new function. So export const with the name of login equals async function, parentheses, curly brackets. And let's just spell out that check. In order to access the values that they submitted, we need to make sure to have parameters of prev state, comma, and this one's the one that's important, form data. Now, in order to save ourselves a little bit of typing here, we could probably just reborrow or recycle some code from our register function. So in the register function, I would borrow this const our user, and then these lines that make sure it's a string, I would just copy that. Come back up to our login function, just paste that in. Okay, and now the first thing I'm going to do is look in the database to see if a user with this username even exists. That's the first check, right? So I'll say like const collection, the user's collection equals await, get collection, its name is users. And then I would say const user equals await collection. We're going to use the find one method of the MongoDB driver. An object, we're going to look one up based on the username, and it would just be our user.username. Okay, now before we even try to compare their attempted password with the real password, first we can say if this user doesn't exist, like if we don't find a match in the database, we don't even need to waste that comparison. So I'd probably say like if exclamation user, like if that's not true, if there is no user, we can just return an object, and you could say like success false. Comma, message, and I'm just making up these property names, by the way, but maybe like invalid username / password. Cool. So now below this, so my cursor is right down here. This will only happen if this doesn't get returned. So now we're safe to try to actually check for the password match. So I would say like const, I'm making this up, maybe like match or not equals, and then we're going to use bcrypt. And it has a method of compare sync. So you give it two things, A, comma, B. So the first value we're trying to compare would be like our user.password. And then the second argument would just be, so this is the actual document from the database that we found. So we would just look for the correct password. So that's user.password. Cool. So now below that, if that's not a match, let's just return with this exact same, false and invalid username password. So I would say if, exclamation match or not, like if it's false, if it's not a match. And now I don't want to have to like duplicate this, so I might just create this object as a variable that I can reuse over and over. So I might copy that, and then up here I'll just say like, let's call it like fail object equals, paste it in, and then I would just point towards that. So this would just be return fail object. And then if the password is not a match, you guessed it, just return fail object. Now down here, this code will only execute if we have a successful match. If it's a match, let's create a token to give them and then store it in a cookie. So in order to save some type, let me write a comment here like create JWT value. Now let's scroll down to save some typing, and let's find that. If you just search in this file for JWT, Perfect. Let's just borrow this line of code, and actually, let's also just borrow the cookies set bit of code. So all of this is going to be almost identical. I would just copy all of that into my clipboard, and then go back up into our login function, and then right here, just paste it in. In this case, though, user ID for the value, it wouldn't just be, we don't have a variable this time named user ID. Instead, we would look on that database object and then look inside it for _ID. That's the MongoDB, the actual field name. Cool, but everything else with this line of code should be good. Now let's look at the cookie that we're setting. Looks good to me. I don't think we need to change anything there. And now, finally, we can just return a redirect back to the home page, right? Away from the login URL back to the home page. Let's give this a save and test it out. So, refresh here. Login is not defined. Did we maybe forget to import it? Let's see. So in login page.jsx. Yes, so I'm referencing login here, but obviously we need to import that at the top. So I would say import parentheses login from, let's say // to go up out of login, // to go up out of app, go into actions, and then it's user controller. Let's give that a save. Cool. Okay, so this is let's go to the home page. No, we want the login page, and then my name was Barks a lot, and my password was Cordy. Helps if you spell bcrypt correctly. Let's go fix that really quick. User controller, where I said match or not. Yep, I spelled bcrypt wrong. All right, let me log in again. Barks a lot. Cordy. Beautiful. So I must have received a valid cookie because now the header says log out. I can click it. So now you can infinitely log in and log out. Perfect. In 2 minutes from now, let's set it up so that if you're logged in, there's a new link in the header that says create a new haiku. However, before we get to that, there's one more check if we go to the home page. There's one more validation check I want to add to our registration form. I want to check in the database to make sure that a username with that name doesn't already exist, right? Like I should not be able to sign up for another account that uses the name of Barks a lot. So really quick, let's just go into our user controller. Let's search for our register function, and let's just add one more validation check in the username area. So maybe right below these checks that we already have, I would just say, a little comment to ourselves, see if username already exists or not. So I'd start by getting the users collection. So const, maybe like users collection. It's underlined, so I'm assuming I might already be trying to create this variable in this same function. If that's the case, we can fix that in about 10 seconds from now, but we're just getting that collection. So now I think down below, we don't need to recreate that variable. So this line of code can just use users collection that we just created up above. So you could get rid of this line. Cool. Let's go back up to our check. All right, so we've got the collection. I would say const, like username in question equals await, and then just use the collection. So users collection, find one. We're trying to look it up based on the username. So this would be where that is our user.username. Okay, and then on the next line, just if this evaluates to true, that means the user already exists. So I'd say if username in question, if that's the case, I would just say errors.username and say that username is already in use. Let's save that and give it a try. So if I try to register Barks a lot, choose a valid password, cool, it doesn't go through. We see that name is already in use, but if I choose a name of like Kitty Doe, beautiful, I'm logged in. At this point, now let's add, once you are logged in, there should be a button right about here that says create a haiku. Let's go set that up. So that would be in our header file. So I would just search for our header.jsx. So here's the content you see if you're logged in. So we have one list item. We would just want another list item above that that says create haiku. But remember in React, a chunk of JSX can only have one top level element. So I would just have a React fragment here. So opening React fragment, there's the closing tag. I would just put that down here. And now I can have another list item. And this one can just contain a link that says create haiku, and then just give it an href of, let's say create-haiku, And let's give it a class. So class name, let's go with like btn and btn-primary for a little splash of color. Cool, that looks good, but we need a little bit of spacing or margin in between them. So on this list item, I'd probably just say class name, maybe like margin right 3. Cool. Now let's just go set up a screen for that URL of /create Haiku. So inside of the app folder, I would create a new folder and name it create-haiku. Inside of that folder, create a file named page.jsx. Now, in order to save some typing, I'd probably just borrow the code inside of login, right? Because that has a form, it has a title. I think we can avoid some typing. So I would just use that as our boilerplate for the create Haiku page. Let's just paste that in. Let's just start by changing the title to, like create Haiku. Let's give that a save. So now when you click on create Haiku, awesome. We would just want to change this to be like, lines 1 through 3 of your haiku. So let's just go back into our JSX for that. Let's find the username input. Let's just change its name. Instead of username, it can be like line 1. And the placeholder can say like line number 1. And then for the error, that would be, instead of username, line 1. And then the actual error message, this could be, instead of username, line 1. And now we don't need the password field. I would just duplicate this entire div and just have another 2 of them. So duplicate it twice. So let me copy that. We don't need the password field. So I would delete that div. So delete that. And then I would just paste in my clipboard once, change this. Instead of line 1, that would be line 2. This would be line number 2. The error message check would be 2. This would be line 2. And then just paste it in one more time and have it be line 3. So line 3, line number 3, line 3, and then down here, line 3. Cool. So let's give that a save. All right. So now let's just set things up so that we have a server-side action for when you submit this form, right? We actually store it in the database. So back up towards the top of this file. Currently, the form action is coming from this line of code, and it's using login as the action. We don't want that. So this would be, and just make up a name. Let's call it like create Haiku. But more importantly, where is that function going to live? Let's go create a new file named Haiku controller. So we can assume that it exists because it will in about 20 seconds from now, but we would say like import create Haiku from, and then just change this to Haiku controller. Now let's just save that. That will result in an error, but let's just go create that. So in our actions folder, new file, name it Haiku controller.js, and let's just start spelling it out. So let's say export const create Haiku, and that would equal an async function, parentheses, curly brackets. In the parentheses, let's have parameters of prev state and form data. Inside the function, the first thing I want to do is make the check of, are you a logged in user? If you're not logged in, I want to redirect you back to the home page, right? You should absolutely not be able to create a haiku if you're not logged in. So up at the top of this file, I would import in, let's say import, and what did we name our function inside of get user? We named it get user from cookie. Okay, so I would say import get user from cookie. Cool, VS Code knew exactly what I meant. And then in the function, I would say const user equals await get user from cookie, parentheses to call it. And then if that evaluates to false, that means you're not logged in. So I would just return a redirect back to the home page. You do need to import redirect. So up at the top here, import parentheses, curly brackets, redirect from next/navigation. Let's test this out. So assuming this doesn't happen, let's just return an object that says, message congrats. Let's give that a save. Whoops, looks like we forgot to include use server at the top of this file. Remember, we had that at the top of user controller, so at the top of Haiku controller, use server. Cool, so I am logged in. So if I try to submit this form, we see nothing happens. But if I go over to Firefox where I'm not logged in, and up in the address bar, I manually visit, /create Haiku and click submit. Cool, it kicks us back to the homepage. Let's set it up so even when you try to manually visit that URL, like if I type that in and press enter, I shouldn't even be able to visit this screen. So I would just go back into the create haiku page.jsx for create haiku. And up at the top, let's just import, get user from cookie. And then at the very start of our function, that's the very first thing I'm going to do. I'll say const user equals await, get user from cookie. This should then be an async function. But if that's false, then just return a redirect back to the home page. We do need to import, so import redirect from next navigation. So now if I go back to Firefox, I'm actually really glad we ran into this error. So essentially, because this file of create haiku is using use client, that means we can't try to do anything with the headers, and our get users from cookie, well, reading from cookies is reading from headers. So you would want to move this form into its own component that is use client. And this is great because that's what I would want to do anyways, because if you think about it, the JSX for creating a haiku is going to be almost identical to editing an existing haiku. So I would want to split this form out, that experience of creating and editing a haiku, into its own component so we can leverage it both from the create screen and the edit existing screen. So do this with me. In the components folder, let's create a new file and let's name it like haikuform.jsx. Let's say export default function haiku form parentheses curly brackets. Right here we can have some variables, but then below that we will return parentheses. And now just go back into the create haiku screen, and I'm just going to select this entire from the opening form tag down to the closing form tag. Just cut that into my clipboard, go back into this file, paste it in. Let's give that a save. There's probably going to be an error. We probably forgot to include something, but let's go back into create haiku. And now we just want to import that component. So up at the very top, let's say import haiku form from quotes, and then just go up 2 directories and then go into components, and then it's haiku form. Okay, then we would use that down here. So self-closing haiku form. Let's go ahead and move this line, this form state and form action, that should live in the haiku form now. So I would cut that. In haiku form, that's what should go up here where I said variables. And then we do want to make sure to import use form state. So up at the top here, this line from React DOM use form state, cut that. That should now live in the haiku form file. Let's give that a save. I feel like we're getting close, but sometimes until you actually just try to save it, you're not going to see all the different error messages. Well, actually, before I even save it, I can see that this line is grayed out. It's no longer needed. That means we need it in haiku form. So I would move that over. Let's give that a save. Let's give this one a save. All right, let's see. Can't resolve haiku controller. Okay, so in haiku form, this is just not the correct path any longer. So we would only need to go up 1 directory if you're in the components folder. Let's give that a save. All right, perfect. So now the only final missing detail is back in create haiku. We absolutely don't want use client up at the top of that, and instead we want use client at the top of haiku form. So quotes use client. Now we should be able to perform that check and redirect. So remember, back to the task at hand, in the browser where I'm not logged in, so as soon as I press enter to visit this URL, I should get kicked back to the home screen. Perfect. I don't have permission to submit a new haiku or even visit that template. Beautiful. Now let's get back to the task at hand. Assuming you are logged in, you should indeed be able to submit this and, actually create a new poem in the database. So right now, let's go set up the validation checks, that make sure that the lines aren't empty and that like this line needs to contain at least 5 syllables and not a ton. And this one should contain at least 7 syllables. Now there is a really cool package on NPM where you can count the syllables. I don't know if it's 100% accurate, but in this lesson or this video, we're just going to say like you need at least 5 characters, 7 characters, 5 characters, and then we'll choose like an arbitrary number. You can't go above and beyond that. But anyways, let's just add some basic validation to this. And then once that's set up, we'll actually store it in the database. So here's what I would do. Let's go into our Haiku controller. And in create Haiku, we could start spelling out our validation, but I'm going to stop us right here. I know that when we set up the functionality to edit an existing Haiku, it's going to have the exact same validation. So I'm from the start going to split this out into its own separate function. So I'll say async function. Let's call it like, and I'm just making this up, maybe like shared Haiku logic, parentheses, curly brackets. And then that way you can just call this from both in create Haiku and edit existing Haiku. So in create Haiku, let's get rid of this return message congrats. Assuming that you've made it past this check, I would just say const, and I'm just making this up, but let's call it like results, and then that equals await, and then just call shared Haiku logic. In the parentheses here, let's pass into this function everything it would need to perform all the checks. So let's give it like form data, right? The incoming values that the user typed into the fields, comma, let's also give it user, like the user that's doing the form submitting. Cool. Now, up in this function, let's be sure to receive those. So we'll say, parameters of form, data, comma, user. And now let's just start validating the data. So I would begin by saying const errors is an empty object. If we run into errors, we can just add new properties to that errors object. I would say like const our Haiku equals an object. Let's say line 1 is form data get line 1. I would just duplicate that line a few times, and then just line 2 and line 3. Comma, we also want a property of author. And now we might be tempted to think that that's as easy as just saying user dot, user ID from the JWT. However, in MongoDB, you need to format an ID using their specific data type. Let me show you what we need to do. Up at the very top of this file, we just need to import, and this is just a MongoDB detail. We just need to import curly brackets, object, and then the I is uppercase, but the D is lowercase. Object ID from the MongoDB package. Okay, and then down here for author, this would not be user.userid. It would be use object ID, that special data type, and then it has a method called create from hex string, and then give that user.user ID. Cool, so now we have this object. This is what we would want to store in the database. However, now we can start performing a little bit of cleanup and validation. So the first thing I would do, because I'm using MongoDB, I don't want objects getting anywhere near my database. I want to make sure these are just strings. So I'd probably just say like if type of, our Haiku.line1, if that does not equal string, then just set it to be an empty string. So our Haiku, line 1, would just be empty quotes. I would do that for lines 2 and 3 as well. You could just select the number 1 on this second line, press Control or Command D. That selects the next instance. Cool, you could hit Escape. Perfect. The next thing I would probably do is trim off any white space at the start or end of those strings. So I'd say like our Haiku, line 1 equals our Haiku, line 1 dot trim, and then just do that for lines 2 and 3. So number 2 and number 3. Next, I would make sure that there's no like multiple lines of text. Each line should just be a single line of text, so no line breaks. So I would say like for line number 1, our Haiku, line 1 should equal our Haiku, line 1 dot replace. And we're going to give it two things, a comma b. So the first is a regular expression. Let's actually start with the second argument. So I'll just give it quotes and then a space. Just basically replace it with empty space. And then I would actually probably just move this line above the trim lines because then this would take care of getting, I'm just replacing any of the line breaks. So for the regular expression, instead of the a placeholder, this would be, //. And then I'm not going to claim to, this is about the extent of my regular expression knowledge. I'm not going to claim to understand every character. So I did Google this. In other words, I'm not even going to attempt to try to explain or teach what goes in between here. Let's just type it out together. Regular expressions are very tricky for me to memorize. So let's say like opening parentheses, \r\n, and then a pipe, and then \n, and then a pipe, and then \r. Close out the parentheses, and then after that slash, let's say G for global. Cool. So in other words, you're not allowed to include line breaks. Now I would just do that for lines 2 and 3 as well. So line 2, this would be line 3, and line 3. All right, now down here, let's start counting the characters or the syllables. So I would say if our haiku line 1, if the length is less than 5, right? A syllable has to be at least 1 letter. Now, I know that's not an accurate way to count syllables, but use your imagination. For extra credit, you could go out and try to use the actual syllable counter package on NPM. But let's just say, if that's the case, errors, let's add a property of line 1 and say, too few syllables must be 5. Cool. And then let's do the same thing, but if you have too many syllables. So I would just duplicate that line and say, like, I don't know, if this is more than like 25 characters, then this would be too many syllables must be 5. Okay. Now I would duplicate these lines for line number 2. So this would be line number 2, line 2. This would be line 2 and 2. Instead of 5 and 25, though, the second line of a haiku is supposed to have 7 syllables. So I would bump this up to like 7 and 35. And then the rules should say this must be 7 or must be 7. And then just create one more duplicate copy. This would be line 3. This would be line 3. Next up, I want to make sure that users can only include like A through Z and 0 through 9. I don't want any special characters in these lines. So up above this function, I'd probably create a separate function and just name it, let's see, like is alpha. So we've already created is alphanumeric, but this time I do want to allow spaces, and maybe periods and commas. So I would say like is alpha numeric with basics. I don't know. I'm just making this up. So the parameter, we could call it text. And then I would say const regex equals // Let's fill that out in just a moment. And then I would just return regex.test and give it the text value. Now, for the regular expression, this would be caret, square brackets, and then A through Z, and then uppercase A through Z, and then 0 through 9. And then you are allowed to have a space, you are allowed to have a period, and you are allowed to have a comma. After the square brackets, let's say asterisk and then $sign. Cool, now we can go leverage that. So down here, for one of our final checks, let's say if, and then is alphanumeric with basics, call that, and it would be just pass it our haiku.line1. Now, if this is not true, so we want exclamation at the start of that, and then if that's the case, I would say errors.line1 and say, no special characters allowed. And then I would just do the same thing for lines 2 and 3. So that should be 2 and 2. This and this should be 3. So perfect. As a final check, I would probably make sure that the fields aren't completely empty. And then I would just say, this field is required. So if our haiku.line1, if length perfectly equals 0, then errors.line1 equals this field is required. You might have guessed it. You would do the same thing for 2 and 3. So 2 and 2, 3 and 3. Cool. Now remember the context of where we are. We are inside this shared haiku logic function. So the job of this function is to return something. So down here at the very end of our function, what do we want to return? Let's have an object and let's pass along errors, comma. Let's have our haiku and just give it our haiku. So whenever you use this function, these are the useful things that you need. Now in modern JavaScript, if the name of your property and the variable value match like this, like if this is a perfect match with this, you actually don't need to spell it out. You can just say errors, comma, and then the same thing with this. You can just say our haiku. Let's save that. And now let me show you how we're going to leverage it down in create haiku. So we have results, and that's going to give us back, errors and the cleaned up, validated, trimmed and cleaned up our haiku. So below this line, I would just check for any errors. So I would say like if results.errors.line1, or if results.errors.line2, or if results.errors.line3. So if any of those are true, then let's just return errors with results.errors. However, if that doesn't get returned, so down where our cursor is, this means we are error-free, which means we're safe to actually save it into the database. So let's start working with our database. Save into DB. Let's say const haikus collection equals await get collection haikus. And we probably need to import this up at the top of the file, right? Get collection. Yep, so I would say import, curly brackets, get collection from, quotes, .. lib, and then we named it db. Cool. Let's go back down. Now that we have that collection, we can say const, new haiku equals await, and then just use it, haiku's collection. We're looking for the insert one method. And then our perfectly formatted and cleaned up document is just living in results.our haiku. As soon as this finishes, let's redirect the user. So we'll return a redirect back to the home page. Because in just a little bit from now, we're going to set up our home page so that if you're logged in, it shows you a list of all of your haikus. Let me make sure though, did we include redirect up at the top here? We did. Cool. Let's give this a save and test it out. So I'll refresh just to be sure. So I'll just say, I'm not going to actually count syllables right this minute. I'll just say this is good, this is great, this is wonderful. Click submit. Okay, and the real test would be to go into your MongoDB database and see if it actually appears. All right, this is looking promising. Now I have a new collection called haikus. It says it has one document. If you click on it, awesome. This is good. This is great. This is wonderful. And there is my ID for the Kitty Doe user. Nice. Now, a little bit later in the video, we can set up the functionality so that you can edit an existing haiku. But before we get to that, I think it would be a good idea. Let's set up our homepage, your dashboard, so that when you're logged in, you see a list of all of the haikus where you're the author. So here's how I would set that up. If we visit our homepage, page.jsx, so let me show you what I have in mind here. In this area that's going to happen if you are indeed logged in, instead of this paragraph, why don't we do this? Let's create our own component. We'll create it in about 10 seconds from now, but let's call it like dashboard, self-closing, and then I would just give it a prop of user and set that to equal the decoded, JWT user. Now we haven't created this file yet, but in just a moment we can. So maybe up at the top, let's just try to import it from where it will be in the future. So import, no curly brackets, just import dashboard from / components. We'll name it dashboard. Now, if you save that, you will run into an error, but we can fix it by just creating that file. So in components, new file, let's name it dashboard.jsx. In this file, let's say export default function dashboard parentheses curly brackets. In the parentheses, let's be sure to have props, and then that's how we can access that incoming user. So in this function, let's return a bit of JSX. So maybe let's have like an overall div, and then inside of that, I'll have like a heading level 2 that says your haikus, and we can give that a few classes. Let's go with text center, maybe text 2XL, text gray 600, MB5. All right, now below that, I want a list of all of their haikus. So here's what I would do. First of all, we need to fetch those haikus. So maybe above this function, I would create another function called async function get haikus, parentheses, curly brackets. And in the parentheses, let's just say like ID. So that's going to be like the MongoDB document ID for a user that we want to look up based on. So then you would just call this function down here. So we could say like const plural haikus equals, and then just await get haikus. Since we're using await, be sure to say async, and then which ID do we want to get? It would just be props.user.user ID. Now, before we go try to actually fetch that in the database, let's just try to log it to the console. So console.log ID, and then we'll just return like an empty array. So in other words, let's make sure that we're seeing an ID in our console. So if I refresh my dashboard a few times, perfect. There is my user ID. Cool. So awesome. Now we just want to actually look that up in the database. So up at the top here, let's import get collection from our DB file. So .. go into lib, get db.js or just db. Cool. So first of all, we want to get that haikus collection. So let's say like collection equals await get collection haikus. And then let's say like const results equals await collection find. So find is when you want to find everything that matches your selector. We're going to try to find based on the ID. We can fill that in 10 seconds from now, but at the end of that, let's say sort by something, and then at the end we'll say toArray. So in MongoDB, when you just return a single document, you don't need to call toArray, but when you're returning multiple documents, it's going to return data in a format that makes sense to MongoDB, but does not make sense to JavaScript. So this just turns it into a JavaScript array. Cool. So we want to fill in the find query. We want to find by the author. So we'll just say we're author. And now we can't just say ID. We need to first turn it into a MongoDB object type. So up at the top here, I would say import object ID from the MongoDB package. And then this would be object ID create from hex string, parentheses to call out. And that is where you would give it ID. Cool, and then that's what you would return here. You would return results. Just for a quick test, let's log results and see if it's what we would expect. So if I refresh the home page, check out my console, awesome. It's an array with just one item in it, but that's my Haiku, right? This is good, this is great, this is wonderful. So we no longer need that console.log. So the idea is that now that's what this will equal, right? That's what this function is going to return. So now we can just loop through this down in our JSX. So down here, I would just have curly brackets for something dynamic. And we're going to work with our Haikus array, and then all arrays have access to the map method. In these parentheses, let's give it an arrow function with two parameters. Let's say Haiku and index. And then arrow symbol, curly brackets, and then just return a bit of JSX. So like maybe a div. Inside the div, let's have like haiku.line1. And then this is not the actual format we're going to go with in the end, but just to get it up and running really quick. Let's have like line 2, line 3. And on the opening div, let's give it a key of index. Let's give that a save. Cool. So there's one poem. Now, just for a little bit of a quick styling, you could include like a line, horizontal like rule. And now if we go create a second haiku, say this is my second and great amazing haiku. Click submit. It redirects me back to the home page. Cool. I am seeing a list of all of my haikus. Now from here, the most obvious next step is we don't just want to output text, we want an image-based haiku. And we want to let the user upload an image, and we want this text embedded in the image, so on and so forth. However, before we get to that, let's go ahead and set up the ability to edit an existing haiku and delete an existing haiku. So let's just start by having a link here that says edit, and it would display for each one. So here's how I would set that up. So before the horizontal rule, you could just have a link, and you'd want to be sure to import that up at the top. So import link from next/link. But it could just say, for now, we can set up a nice icon later, but for now it can just say edit, and that would point towards. So equals, and then instead of quotes, I would say curly brackets, so I can use a template literal, and it would just be like slash, and then how about like haiku slash, and then whatever its ID number is. Or actually, how about instead of haiku, how about edit haiku and then slash its ID? So we don't want to hard code that. We want to do something dynamic. So $ curly brackets, and then this would just be haiku._ID. Now, because that's a MongoDB data type, just to play it safe, I'm going to call the toString method. Let's give that a save and see what that gets us. Cool, so there it is, and it doesn't look like a link. Let's not worry about what it looks like for now, but when you click on it, obviously we get a 404 because we didn't set this up yet, but check out the URL pattern. This is exactly what I wanted. Edit haiku and then the ID. So now let's just go set up a folder that matches this URL structure. So inside of app, we want a subfolder. So new folder on app named edit haiku. Oops, you definitely need to spell that correctly. Haiku. And then inside of that folder, right, like if you look at the URL pattern, so that's the first folder. And then this second folder is the dynamic ID variable. So Inside of Edit Haiku, you have another subfolder, and it has to be a square bracket. So opening square bracket, closing square bracket. Now, in between here, we could say pizza, we could say unicorn, but it's a URL parameter. And in this case, it makes the most sense to just simply call it ID. But it starts with a square bracket, ends with a square bracket. Cool. Now, finally, inside that folder, that's where you can indeed have page.jsx. In this new file, let's say export default function page parentheses curly brackets. And now we're going to want to be able to access whatever that dynamic ID value actually is. So we want to make sure to include props as a parameter here. We'll use that ID in just a moment here, but inside the body of this, let's return a bit of JSX. And I'd probably start with a div, and then we could have a heading level 2 that says edit post. And then down here, I would just reuse our Haiku form component. So we want to import that at the top here. So import Haiku form from quotes. We want to go up out of the ID folder, up out of the edit Haiku, up out of app, and then go into components, and then grab Haiku form. So that's what we want down here. Haiku form self-closing. Let's give that a save. Cool. So now I'm on this URL, and this makes sense. Let's style this title that says edit post. So I would give it a class name of text center, text, maybe like 4XL, text gray, 600, margin bottom 7. All right, at this point, now the question becomes, how do we have this form do something different than when we were using it on the Create Haiku page? Right? Because currently, so if that's just pulling in Haiku form, well, if we open up Haiku form, when you submit it, its form action is Create Haiku. So what I would do is anytime we're using this Haiku form component, I would give it a prop and then say, hey, am I trying to create or am I trying to edit? And then we can update this action accordingly. So in other words, go back to the edit page, right, where we were just including it. And I would just give it a prop, and let's call it like, I mean, you could make up anything, but let's say like action equals quotes, edit. And then on the Create Haiku screen, let's do the same thing. Let's give it an action of create. So in Create Haiku, when we call Haiku form, just say action equals create. Cool, you can give that a save. Now let's go into Haiku form. And the idea is now on our main function here, let's say props. And then before this line where we're setting up use form state, I would just say like let actual action. I'm just making that up, just initialize it. And then I would say like if props.action triple equal signs create, then, you know, actual action equals create Haiku. That's our server action. Currently we have it hard coded to that. And then I would just duplicate this and have another if check. I would say like if the action is edit, and then set this to edit Haiku. And then this would not be hard coded. This could just be actual action. Cool. And then before we forget, in Haiku form up at the top here, we've already imported Create Haiku, that server action. Let's say comma, and also be sure to import Edit Haiku. Why don't we save this and make sure that our Create functionality is still working? So if I click on Create Haiku and say, wonderful for all 3 lines. Okay, so it's still working perfectly. And then if I try to click to edit it, now we would just need to set up a server-side action named Edit Haiku. So let's do that. Let's go into our Haiku controller. And to save a lot of typing, I'm just going to duplicate this Create Haiku function. So I would just select from here to here, duplicate it. On the new copy, let's just change the name to Edit Haiku. Okay, so this can stay the same. We're checking if the user is logged in. This can stay the same. We're using our validation logic. This can stay the same. We're just making sure that there are no errors. It's just that down here, we don't want to just save a new item into the database. We want to make an update. So we definitely want to keep this, get the collection, and we can keep the return redirect line, but let's get rid of this line where we insert 1 into the database. So instead, what we need to do here is, first of all, we need to figure out which Haiku we're trying to update, like the ID of the Haiku in question. So to make sure that that's getting sent over, I would just go into Haiku form, and down here, just right before the submit button, so down at the end of our form, I would just have a hidden input. So I'd say input, type of hidden, and then let's give it a name of like Haiku ID. And then let's give it a default value of, and now this is the $1 million question, like what is the ID of this Haiku? Clearly we wouldn't know that yet inside of this file of Haiku form. So let's circle back to this. For now we can just put it to, curly brackets. Let's circle back to that in just a moment. The page that we really need to focus on right now lives in the edit Haiku, and then the ID and then page.jsx. So when we're calling Haiku form, we want to pre-populate these fields with the existing values. So the question is, where should we perform that database lookup of these existing values? I don't think it makes sense to perform that lookup in the Haiku form component because sometimes it's going to be used for the create Haiku. I think it makes the most sense inside of this page.jsx file to just look up the database document here. So we can access that from the props parameter. Let me show you what I have in mind here. So before we return anything, and again, I'm in the edit Haiku ID page.jsx file. Let's do this. Let's say const, let's say like doc for the database document equals await. And then we can create this function in 10 seconds from now, but let's say like get doc, VS Code, that was not what I wanted. Get doc, parentheses, and let's pass it props.params.id. So this is how you can access the dynamic part of that URL. All right, we named it like square brackets ID. You look on the params of props, and then it's just whatever you named it. So we named it ID. If we're using await, let's say async, and then let's just create a function up here with this name of get doc. So I just made that up, but I'd say like async function get doc, parentheses, curly brackets. Let's be sure to receive that ID here. And then in this function, we're going to need to get the database collection. So up at the top here, I would import curly brackets get collection from, and then go up 3 levels, and then go into lib, and then get db. Cool. So what we're going to do is, const haikus collection equals await get collection haikus. And then we just want to get the result. So const result equals await haikus collection. We're going to use the find one method, and we're going to find it based on the underscore ID because that's the name of the field in the MongoDB database. So we're that colon. And now you can't just provide the string. We need to convert it into the MongoDB data type. So we'd say import curly brackets object ID from the MongoDB package. And then right here, it would just be object ID. Oops, not parentheses. We want to use the create from hex string method, and that's where you would pass it ID. All right, then on the next line, you would just have this function return that result. So now down here, doc will equal the actual document in the database. And now check it out. When we call Haiku form, we can just give it that entire database document. So I would literally just say, like, give it a prop of Haiku, curly brackets, and just give it that document. So now we can save that and then go back into Haiku form. And now remember, this is what we wanted to circle back to, the default value of the hidden field. This would just be props.haiku. And then let's have a question mark to make it optional in case this is on the create Haiku form. But then just look inside that for underscore ID. And to play it safe, I'd probably call the toString method on that. Cool, let's save that, and then let's make sure, yes, that we do indeed have props here in our function definition. Cool. So now, when you refresh the screen for edit post, before we actually submit the form, let's just get the existing lines populating into these fields. So back in our Haiku form, let's just find that first input. So line number 1, I would just give it a default value of curly brackets and then props.haiku question mark for something optional dot line 1. So if you save that, absolutely amazing. So now whichever Haiku you go to, it could be any of them, but that's getting populated. So now let's just do the same thing for line 2 and 3. I would just select this default value line, go find the input for line number 2. Here it is, just paste it in, but change this to line 2. Do the same thing for line 3. So here it is, the input, paste it in, change it to 3. Let's give that a save. All right, this is looking great. So now we just want to actually pay attention to what happens when you click this submit button. So let's pick up where we left off. If you go back into Haiku controller, remember, this is where previously there was the create a new document in the database. Now we just want to do, find one and edit. So about 5 or 10 minutes ago, we asked the question, how do we know which Haiku we're trying to update? Well, we added it as that hidden input. So I would say let Haiku ID equals form data and then call get. We named it Haiku uppercase ID. Now, if that is not a string, but if it's an object, I don't want to let it anywhere near my MongoDB database. So I would probably say if type of Haiku ID does not equal string, I would just set it to, an empty string. Cool. Now, in 5 minutes from now, let's be sure to perform the check that you are indeed the author of this post. You shouldn't be able, just because you're logged in, you shouldn't be able to update other people's posts. So let's make sure you are the author of this post. Otherwise, have operation fail. We can circle back to that in a few minutes, but let's just perform the update in the database. So I would just await, and we already have Haiku's collection, and we're going to use the method that is aptly named find one and update. So you give this function two things. The first is which one you're trying to find, and then the second is the updates that you want to make. So instead of A here, this would be, we're looking it up based on its ID, and then we would say object ID create from hex string, and then just pass it, you guessed it, Haiku ID. All right, now instead of the B placeholder, the curly brackets, what do you actually want to update? We want to update the entire object that we've built so far. So $set, this is a MongoDB operation, and then we're just going to say results.ourHaiku. Remember, that is the entire object that our cleanup and logic function returns. All right, and then after that line, the final step is just to, we already have it down here, just return a redirect back to the home page. Let's give this a save and see if it works. So I'll go to my home page, refresh, I'll edit this one. Maybe I'll change this is good to this is amazing and click submit. Beautiful. There is the update. There is the change. This is working perfectly. Before we forget, let's go back and perform that very important check. So right here, we want to make sure that the user ID that's in the validated cookie token matches the author ID of the Haiku in question. So the first thing I would do is literally just create a variable called Haiku in question. And we already have its ID here, but I just want to look it up in the database first before we perform the find one and update. I want to check its author ID value. So I would just say, await Haiku's collection, find one. We want to find one based on the ID, and this would be object ID, create from hex string, and then just give it Haiku ID. Now on this line, we can check. So we can say if Haiku in question, look inside it for its author property, and you could convert that to a toString. And then I would say if that does not equal, so exclamation equal, if that does not equal user.userID. So if this code evaluates inside of here, that means we have a problem. That means someone's trying to update a post that they are not the author of. In that case, I would just halt further execution of our entire function with return, and I would just redirect them back to the home page. I mean, in the real world, you could have set up flash messaging and say, operation not allowed. But for now, you can just kick them back to the home page. Cool. Now, the way that you could test that out pretty easily is by visiting an edit screen in this window where you're logged in, and then copy that URL into your clipboard. And then in Firefox, I'm not logged in as anyone. So I could create a brand new account as Fluffy, QWERTY. And then in the URL bar, if I try to visit that screen, in just a minute, we can make it so they can't even see this edit screen. But we definitely want to make it so that they cannot edit the Haiku, right? So if I click submit, let's put in at least enough syllables. It does not go through. It kicks me back to the home page. And if you go back here and refresh, you can see that none of those values were updated. So it did not go through. Why don't we make it so that a user that doesn't own the post can't even visit the edit screen? In other words, of course, they can't actually manipulate the data in the database, but they shouldn't even be able to visually see this edit screen. So to set that up, just jump into Edit Haiku, the ID folder, the page.jsx. And right here, we already have the database document with the correct author ID. So now I would probably just try to decode the current cookie of the user ID. So in other words, up here, I would say import, what is it? Get user from cookie from that path in our lib file. And then I would just say like const user equals get user from cookie. And then I would just compare the two. I would say if parentheses, if user.user ID does not double equal sign doc.author, and then I would call the toString. So if that's the case, then I would just return a redirect back to the home page. We do need to be sure to import that up at the top. So import curly brackets redirect from next navigation. Let's give that a save. So can I still see the screen? Oops, I was going to say where I'm logged in. I should be able to see the screen, but I can't. We probably have an error somewhere right in here. Yes, so I would need to await this line, right? Await get user from cookie. Then hopefully this comparison works. Let's see. Let's save that. Go back. Now can I click edit? Looks like I needed to manually refresh, but now yes, cool. So I can in that screen, but if I take that URL, copy it. In this window, this is Firefox. I'm not logged in as the owner of this post, and if I try to visit it, cool, it kicks me back to the home screen. At this point, we are just one step away from implementing the fun user-uploaded image aspect of this application. Let's just go back to the homepage and let's set up the ability to delete an existing post. As soon as we're done with that, we can get to the fun part. So I would just go back into our dashboard. And right after the edit link, let's not use a link to perform the delete operation, because it's not just going to be like a simple GET request. It's going to be a request that actually alters application state. So let's use a form. So I would just have, opening and closing form tag here. In the middle, let's have a hidden input. So type of hidden. And the default value would be just haiku ._ID, and then call the toString method on that. And then let's give this hidden input a name. So this would be name, just ID, the ID of the document we're trying to delete. And then below that, let's have a button that just says delete. Let's not worry about styling right now, because we're going to give this a much nicer appearance 20 minutes from now. On the form tag, we don't need to wait back for the response from the server, so we don't need to use use form state, right? Because we don't need any validation messages or anything like that. So for just a really simple instance like this, you can literally just say action equals curly brackets, and now we haven't created this function yet, nor have we imported it, but we're going to call it delete haiku. All right, now up at the top of this file, let's just be sure to import that. So up here, I would say import curly brackets, delete haiku. We haven't created that function yet, but it's going to come from quotes, .. actions, and it would be haiku controller. If you tried to submit the form, you would get an error message because we need to go create this first. So just go into haiku controller, and let's just create a new function named delete haiku. So it doesn't matter exactly where, but right above, edit haiku, I would say export const delete haiku equals async function, parentheses, curly brackets. And now normally we've been saying prev state and then form data because form data needs to be the second item, the second parameter. That is true if you're using use form state. But in this case, since we're not using the use form state wrapper, we only need one parameter. So this would just be form data. Cool. Now I would borrow certain code from edit haiku. I do want to decode the incoming user. So I would borrow these lines where we, redirect if you're not logged in. And then I also want to borrow the code that makes sure that you are the author of the haiku in question. So I would scroll down. And in the edit haiku function, I would just borrow all of this code. So, const haiku's collection down to here where we find one and update. I would just select all of that, and even the final redirect. I would just copy that and then back in delete haiku, just paste in your clipboard here. And now let's just adjust this for deleting a haiku. All right, so in this case, we named the form field just ID. Okay, we still want to get the haiku in question, and then we still want to check to compare, like, if you're not the author of that post, just halt further execution of this function. We don't want to perform the database option. And then we just need to change this one. So instead of finding one, we want to delete one. So just change this function to delete one. And then you don't need this second argument, the object, what we're calling set. You can get rid of that. Cool. So you just want to delete one based on that ID. Let's give this a save and test it out. So let me refresh the home page. Let me create a brand new haiku and have the first line say, like, delete me, please delete me now. All right. Whoops, and I'm just realizing I want to sort these on the home page so that the newest ones sits at the top. So before we test out the delete functionality, let's do that. So you would just go into dashboard. And remember up here where we're saying find and sort and toArray, we do need to provide an argument to sort so that the newest ones sit on top. So what you can do is just give that an object and then just sort by _ID and give that a value of not 1, but -1. And that controls whether it's like ascending or descending. So if you give that a save, you refresh, cool. So now the newest one sits on top. We're trying to test out if you delete that one. So let me click delete. Absolutely perfect. We are in business. Right, we've taken care of all of our CRUD operations. You can create, we are reading them here, we can edit or update, and we can delete. Now let's get to the fun part. So we want to be able, when you're creating or editing a haiku, we want to have a field and the ability where a user can upload an image of their choice that has to do with the haiku. And then I don't just want to use like CSS to overlay their text on top of the image. I want the actual image file itself that we generate, the JPEG or the PNG or the WebP or whatever. I want it to contain the lines of text. So that way users can literally just save the image file and send it to a friend or share it on social media, right? Like I want the text actually embedded in the image file. Now, how in the world are we going to do that? Well, that brings us to the sponsor of this video, which is Cloudinary. Big thank you to Cloudinary for sponsoring this video. So why am I so excited to integrate Cloudinary as our image solution for our Haiku app? Well, two main reasons. Number one, Cloudinary makes it really easy to have your users upload images. And then with Next.js apps, usually when you're hosting them in production, the file system is very temporary. So you can't really like permanently store user uploaded files. You would probably need to set up like an AWS bucket. But with Cloudinary, you don't need to do that. It's really easy. You just upload the file, they store it for you. It's that simple. The other big reason is that Cloudinary makes it really easy to edit images on the fly by just different request parameters and a URL. I mean, you can say the exact size, aspect ratio, format, cropping strategy. You can layer other images on top of other images. You can, as we'll see, you can layer text on top of images. And as especially we're going to see, you can use AI generative fill. Like if an image isn't the exact aspect ratio you want, you can literally, just by providing a different request parameter, you can have AI generate like a further bit of the image, like on the left direction or the right direction. So in other words, it's going to make letting users upload images very easy, and it's going to make it simple to manipulate and edit the image to be exactly what we want. So even though Cloudinary is indeed sponsoring this video, I have used and recommended Cloudinary many times in a lot of my tutorial projects. I'm a big fan of their service. Anyways, I'm not going to walk through with you how to sign up for an account. It's completely free to get started. You don't even need to enter a credit card. So right now, I would recommend pausing this video and getting yourself signed up with a completely free Cloudinary account. All right, once you have your account, make sure you're logged into your dashboard. We're going to need an API key and an API secret from your dashboard in about 5 minutes from now. But before we get to that, let's talk about how to integrate Cloudinary with Next.js. Luckily for us, Cloudinary has made it very easy. They have an official first-party package that sort of connects the dots between Next and their image service. So this is the website for it. It's next.cloudinary.dev. And if I just click on Get Started, Awesome. You can see there's just a package on NPM. It's called Next-Cloudinary. So let's go get that installed. So in my command line, I'll press Control-C, and then it's just npm install Next-Cloudinary. Go ahead and press enter. This should be fairly quick. Now, the next step after that, I believe, is just to add in our environment variables so that our app has access to our Cloudinary account. Yep. So if you scroll down just a little bit, there's just these 3 environment variables that we want to add to our file. Let's be sure to use these exact same names so that you and I are on the same page. So the first one is, let me just copy that into my clipboard here. Go into your .env file and just add in a new variable. So it's next_public_cloudinary_cloud_name. You need to make sure you use this exact name because the Cloudinary components will be looking for this exact name. Let's add an equal sign at the end of that. And for now, let's just put 123 as a placeholder. We also want to be sure to add in these 2 as well. So I would just copy those into your clipboard. So it's the other 2 are next_public_cloudinary_API_key, and then Cloudinary_API_secret. Now, let's go talk about how to actually include your values here. So just visit your Cloudinary dashboard. And towards the left-hand menu, we're looking for dashboard. And on that screen, up at the top here, we see this area, and that has your cloud name. So yours will be a different value than mine. And this is not a secure or secret value. Like, you're purposefully going to leak this value. It's not even leaking it. The visitors of your website, their client-side JavaScript will need this value. So it's not a super secret, but yours will be different than mine. But just use that cloud name. That's this first value, right? So that's your cloud name. And notice when a variable begins with next_public, the Next.js framework is smart enough to make it available to client-side JavaScript. However, like for this one, for example, and like our JWT secret or connection string, if an environment variable does not begin with next_public, then by default it is safe and secure and only available to your server-side code, not your client-side code. So the question now becomes, where can you find both your API key and your API secret? Simple. Back in your dashboard of Cloudinary, just click on Go to API Keys here. Yep, and then from this screen, you might need to generate a key. I can't remember if you have one by default, but just click the button to generate a new API key. And then down here, you'll see both your key and your secret. So respectively, that is your key value here and your secret value here. So plug those in and then save this file and go ahead and close it. Okay, and then let's make sure to get our server up and running again. So npm run dev. Cool. At this point, let's get back to the task at hand. So when you are creating or editing a haiku, in addition to lines 1 through 3, I want another button down here that says upload photo. And when you click on that, you can select a photo to upload. So let's make that happen. Here's what I would do. Let's find our haiku form. So in components, haiku form.jsx. Now what's really cool is when we installed that Next Cloudinary package, it already has a component. So we don't need to write a lot of or really any HTML or JSX. The component is going to do all of the heavy lifting for us. So up at the top here, let's just import it. So import curly brackets. The name of the component for uploading a file is CLD upload widget. And that's just going to be from the Next-Cloudinary package. Cool. Now let me show you how we use this. Let's go down into our JSX and in between the line 3 of the haiku and the submit button. So yeah, there is the line 3 and then this is the hidden input in the submit. So right about here, I'd probably have a div. I'd give it a bit of margin bottom, but I just want there to be a button that says upload photo. Now, luckily for us, in order to have a button that's perfectly integrated with, opening the upload widget, we don't need to reinvent the wheel and write that ourselves. If we just go to the next.cloudinary.dev site that we looked at before, click Get Started. In the left-hand sidebar, here are the different components that are made available to us. And right now we're leveraging this one, CLD upload widget. So if you click on that, and then instead of basic usage, definitely I want to click on this one called signed uploads. Essentially, I don't want to let anyone have permission to upload to my Cloudinary cloud unless they are a logged in and authenticated user within my app. So I want to give them a signature, and if they don't have a signature, I don't want the upload to work. So we're going to use signed uploads. Anyways, from the signed upload screen for the CLD upload widget, if you just scroll down a little bit and expand this area, we can just borrow this code. And technically, we've already imported it up at the top of the file. So we just want this code here, from the start of the opening tag to the end of the closing tag. So just copy that into your clipboard. And then right here is where you would paste it in. Awesome. And just to integrate this with our Daisy UI styling, I'd probably give the button, maybe like a class name of BTN and BTN-secondary. Let's give that a save and see if we run into any errors or if that already gets us something that works. I did need to manually refresh because we ran a fresh npm run dev, but cool, there's the button. Let's try to click on it. Nice. So there is the Cloudinary upload widget. Now, where do we go from here? Well, I could try to select the photo from my hard drive and click on pictures and choose this image of a dog, but the upload is going to fail, and I'm glad that it failed, and that's because we didn't give it a signature yet, so it doesn't have permission. Your upload might have actually worked. So if you went into Cloudinary and checked your assets, you might see the image you just uploaded. So right now I want to show you how to set yours up to be like mine, where you're only accepting signed uploads, right? Where your server has given them, the user, a signature that's valid and legitimate, and so only then should it have permission to upload to our Cloudinary cloud. So if you go into your settings screen in Cloudinary, and then towards the top here, click on Upload Presets, you just want to make sure that your default preset is set to be signed. So you can click here to edit your default upload preset and just make sure, right, that the signing mode is set to signed. If it's unsigned, then they don't even have to have a valid cookie in our application, right? Anyone can upload to your cloud. All right, at this point, I'll assume that everyone watching this has now set up their Cloudinary to require signed uploads. So let me show you what we're going to do now. Don't worry, we'll fix this in just a moment to where your form doesn't get auto-submitted when you open the overlay. But let me show you what we need to do. We need to go back into our JSX where we're using the cloud or CLD upload widget and see this prop. This is very important. Signature endpoint. Let's hollow out those quotes. And we get to make up something. It's going to live on our server, right? So let's start with like / for the root of our domain. And then, you could make this up, pizza, unicorn, anything. But why don't we call it like, maybe like widget - signature. Okay, you can go ahead and save that. And now the idea is that we need to go create sort of an API endpoint on our server so that when you visit /widget signature, we provide, assuming the user has a valid cookie, we provide a signature. Now, we don't need to write that code ourselves. So if you go back to the next Cloudinary documentation, if you scroll down just a little bit, we see API endpoint to sign requests. So the first thing you need to do is install the base Cloudinary package. Let's go do that right now. So in our command line, Control-C to stop the current task. And let's say npm install Cloudinary. Cool. Now, before we follow this documentation, let's just go create the file where this would live. So it would just be in the root of our app folder, and we named it widget - signature. In that folder, we're going to create a file, but it is not named page.jsx. It is named simply route.js. Right? It's just an API endpoint. Cool. Now in this file, before we start borrowing code from the official documentation, we are going to want to say import next response from quotes next/server. Now below that, we should be able to just borrow code from the Cloudinary documentation. So if we scroll down a little bit, yes, for the app router. Cool. This code where it's saying import v2 as Cloudinary, just copy that into your clipboard and then just paste it in here. And then I would just adjust this a little bit. So where it says post, we don't need the colon in the request, so just request. And then down here, instead of response, I would change this to next response. Let's give this a save and test it out. So if I go back to my front end, whoops, I forgot to spin up npm run dev once again. So from my create Haiku screen, let me choose an image here. How about this dog? Perfect. It looks like that worked. Now you can confirm if it worked or not by going into your Cloudinary dashboard And in the left-hand menu up here, click on Assets. And then up here towards the top, click on Assets. Yep, there you see it. There's that new image I just uploaded. So now let's just improve the user experience. Once the image finishes uploading, we should probably auto-close this overlay. We also want to stop submitting our overall form when you click this button. We'll fix that later, right? Because then that's going to trigger these warnings. And then finally, we want to keep track of the image that now lives on Cloudinary servers, like its file name or its ID, so that way we can store it in our database, with this Haiku document. However, before we do any of that, let's make sure that we're only giving this signature, back so in route.js, we're only giving this signature if you're logged in. So we need to check the user's incoming cookie. So what I would do is up at the top here, I'd probably just import, what do we name it? Get user from cookie, get user from cookie. And then in this function named uppercase post, I would just say const user equals, await get user from cookie. And then I would just say if exclamation user, like if that's not true, that means it's not a valid cookie that got decoded. So the person is not logged in. Well, I would just return a next response, like just borrow this line down here. Only I would change this to, instead of signature, maybe like message and have it say, sorry. Cool, so let's save that. And let me show you how you could test that out. If we refresh this, let me upload a new image. I'll go with the image of this dog. Okay, so it worked. If I refresh my Cloudinary assets, we should immediately see that new dog. Yep, perfect. And then the way that you could test to make sure that it's actually enforcing that is if I refresh and go into my route.js file. And actually, it'd probably be a lot of work to even get to the create Haiku screen if you're not logged in. So I think the easiest way to see that you need this or else the upload fails down here would just be to set signature to equal, like ABC123. So this should fail on purpose now, right? Like if I save that and maybe refresh and try to upload an image, click browse, I'll choose this image of a cat. Beautiful. We see here this red error message. It says invalid signature. And no matter how many times you try that, you're not going to see that in your Cloudinary cloud. Beautiful. Let's put that back so that it actually works. So not signature colon ABC123, just signature no colon. Cool. Now that we've made sure that only logged in, authenticated users can upload photos to our cloud, let's improve the user experience here a little bit. So once an image completes uploading, let's automatically close this overlay. Like the user shouldn't have to manually click this X. Okay? And then also, first of all, right now, as soon as you click upload an image, because that's a button nested inside our overall form, by default, any clicks on a button submit the form. So let me show you how we could stop that. Let's just go into our Haiku form. And currently, when you click on this button, I would just want to use the event parameter to prevent the default behavior. There's probably a million different ways you could do that, but here's what I would do. In these parentheses, instead of spelling that out directly, let's say like handle click, and then just right above the return line, but still in this code block, I would say, function handle click, parentheses, curly brackets. In the parentheses, be sure to have the event parameter, and then just call prevent default, and then just call the click, or excuse me, not click, call the open function that opens the overlay. So give that a save, and now, let's give that a save, and now if I, wait, you don't even probably need to refresh, but if I open this, if I click on this, and then close the overlay, cool, it's not automatically submitting our form. We're not seeing any validation errors yet. We don't want to submit the form until you actually click this button. Now let's set up the behavior that after you finish uploading an image, this window, this overlay should automatically close. Setting that up is very simple. So on the open tag for CLD upload widget, we just give it a prop of, and it needs to be this exactly, on queues end equals curly brackets for something dynamic, parentheses, let's say result, comma, curly brackets, widget, after the parentheses and the curly bracket, but still inside, the overall value curly bracket, arrow symbol, curly brackets, and then just call widget.close. Let's test this out. So if I save that, and I'll refresh just to be safe. So let me successfully upload an image. I'll go with this dog. All right, so it's uploading. Cool, it automatically finished and closed the window for me. At this point, we're just one step away. Now, we just need to ask ourselves, how do we get the URL? Let me refresh just to see that new dog here. Like, how do we get the URL or the file name of this new image so that we can store it in our database, right? That's all that's missing. When we create a Haiku and store it in our database, we need a way to point towards, that specific image. So in other words, when we're submitting this overall form and we're submitting lines 1, 2, and 3, how do we also send over or submit a photo URL value? Well, check this out. We just go back and find the opening tag for CLD upload widget. And we've already given it props of, onQN and signature endpoint. We just need to give it a new prop of on success. So equals curly brackets for something dynamic. Let's give it parentheses. Let's say result, comma, curly brackets, widget. After the curly brackets and parentheses, but still inside the overall value curly bracket, let's say arrow symbol, curly brackets. And now check this out. Do this with me. Say console.log result ?.info. So this way, in the browser's console, we can see exactly what Cloudinary is giving back to us. I think this will all make sense once we see that in our console. So let's save that and open up your browser's console. And let's successfully upload a new image. Let me refresh, actually. Okay, upload image. Let me choose this panda. Okay, so it's uploading, it finishes, and notice in my console, we get back this really useful object. So it has all sorts of information and properties about that newly created asset, but the ones that we're really interested in are signature and public ID. Signature is coming from Cloudinary. Now on our server side, you and I can check this value, and the only way that it would be a legitimate, trustworthy value when we verify it is if it was coming from someone who knows our Cloudinary secret. So in other words, because this is coming from a client, we can't trust it, right? Like the client is sort of this middle step in between the Cloudinary server and our server, but by verifying this value, then we can indeed trust it. So we're going to verify this value on our server side. And public ID, this is the value that we would want to store in our database. Like this string of text is what points to this exact specific image on our Cloudinary cloud. So let's bring this full circle here. Let's go back into our Haiku form. The idea here is that result.info has information that we're very interested in. So if we look at our database really quick, essentially when you create a Haiku, in addition to just line 1, line 2, line 3, and author, I want a property here called photo, and then, that unique identifier for a photo. But I only want to store that if I know that it's a legitimate value that's actually coming from Cloudinary. So here's what we're going to do. Let's go into our Haiku form. And essentially, down at the bottom, we already have a hidden input with the Haiku ID. I'm just going to have a few more hidden inputs with little bits of information that Cloudinary is giving back to us. I'm essentially passing it back to our server side so that we can maybe store it in the database. Here's what I would do. Let's have an input, set it to type hidden, and let's give it a name of public_ID. So that's a little bit of info coming from Cloudinary. Now, for its value, let's say curly brackets, public_ID. Now, currently, this does not work. In about a minute from now, I'm going to show you how to make this actually live in this variable. But let's go ahead and also do that for two more things, signature and version. So those are the 3 bits of info coming from Cloudinary that we're interested in. So for the second one, let's say version, and then change the value to look for a variable called version. And then this one would be signature. So signature. And this would be signature. Cool. Now let me show you how we can make these variables actually contain these values. We just go back up to where we were logging our console, right, with result info. And we're just going to set, there's a million different ways you could do it. This is just my quick and dirty way. I'm just going to set different pieces of state with the values that I want. So here's how I would do that. Up at the very top of this file, I'm going to make sure that I import, curly brackets, use state from React. And then in our main component function, up at the very top, I would just say const square brackets. Let's say let's start with signature. So signature, comma, set signature equals use state. Give it a default value of just quotes. And then you could just duplicate that line a few more times. So this next one, let's do for public ID. So public_ID. This would be set Let's go with public underscore ID. And then this third one would be version. So version, and this is a set version. So now this is what's going to make these available down in our hidden inputs. And then these set functions, that's how we can actually set the value once we have them, once we've actually heard back from Cloudinary. So let's go back down to where we have result.info or result?.info. So you can leave the console.log for your own debugging purposes, but right below it, I would just say, let's start with signature. So set signature and just give it result?.info.signature. Let's do public ID. So set public ID. This would be result?.public_ID. And then finally version. So set version and then result?.info.version. Cool. Let's save this. And now let's make sure that we're actually receiving these on the server side. Let me explain. So in our Haiku controller, let's look for our shared Haiku logic function, right? Because that's going to run for both creating and editing. So in that function, let's just for debugging purposes, let's say console.log form data. And to be more specific, let's say like get signature. You could do that really quick just for, like public ID and what's the other one? Version. Let's give that a save, open up our console. Now let's try to create a new Haiku with a photo. So create Haiku, I'll say brand new Haiku. I'll use that for all 3 lines. I'll upload an image of this dog. Okay, it closed. Let me click submit. And let's check our console. Cool, so everything is working just as expected. There's our signature, there's our public ID, and there's our version. So we can go ahead and erase those console.log. What that means is that on the server side now, we have access to everything we need in order to make sure that that is a real public ID coming from Cloudinary, right? That our user is not malicious. It's a value that we can trust. So what I would do now is just add a check in our shared Haiku logic. Let's see, just after all of our checks, but before we return our object. So right here, I would say like verify signature. In other words, only if it's legitimate do I want to add on a new property to our Haiku, and we could name it, like photo, but only after we verify it. So at the top of this file, we do need to pull in the Cloudinary library. So that's import Cloudinary from the Cloudinary package. Okay, and then down here, here's what we're going to do. We're going to say const expected signature. So first, we are going to generate what we would expect the signature to be. Then we're going to compare that with what the client has sent over. So I would say equals cloudinary.utils.api_sign request, parentheses to call that. And we're going to give this 2 things, so A, comma, B. Now actually, before we move forward here, let's go into our route.js file from widget signature, and let's just copy this line of code where we said cloudinary.config. Copy that entire block of code here with our environment variables, copy that into your clipboard. In Haiku controller, just back up at the very top, maybe after the imports, you can paste it in. And at the start of that line, I would say const cloudinary config equals this, because we need to access one of these down below. So back down where we are verifying the signature, and we have A, comma, B. Let's actually start with B. So what you give it here is just cloudinary config.api_secret. Now let's go back to the A placeholder. So this would actually be an object, and you're going to give it public ID, and that would just come from form data.get, and that was public_ID. Let's also say comma and give it version, colon, and that would come from form data.get version. Cool. So now we have the expected signature. Now we're just going to compare it to the signature that the user sent over. And the idea here is that there's no way that this would match unless someone somehow knew our Cloudinary secret. So I would say if parentheses expected signature triple equal signs form data get signature. After the if condition, you could have curly brackets if you want to. And now if this is true, that means it's a safe value. So I'm just going to say our Haiku, add onto it a property of photo, and it's going to equal form data.get public_ID. The idea here is that the user didn't ever have to upload the image to our server, so we're saving a ton of bandwidth. It's not like we had to relay it to Cloudinary. They are uploading it directly to Cloudinary, and then we can verify the signature just like this. So let's go ahead and hit save and test it out. So let me refresh, create a brand new Haiku. My new Haiku, I'll use that for all 3 lines. Let me upload an image. Maybe of this dog. Let me click submit. And now the real test is if we look at our MongoDB database. So let me refresh our haikus collection and let me look for that newest one. Beautiful. So we see my new haiku, and notice the photo property is the public ID. So that specific value is how you're going to reference. Let me refresh my Cloudinary cloud. That public ID value in the database is how you can point towards this one specific image. So now we truly have everything we need to build a really nice looking haiku, like a graphical card that shows the image. And then we're also going to learn how to layer the text or sort of embed it into the image that Cloudinary is generating for us on the fly. So in other words, let's start transforming just this plain text interface to now show, our actual images here, one for each haiku. So we know that to change that, we would jump into our dashboard.jsx file, which lives in our components folder. So currently, that's where we're looping through our haikus collection. But at this point, I really want to split out like a haiku into its own component. So in the components folder, let's create a new file. Let's name it haiku.jsx. And I'll say, export default function, haiku, parentheses, curly brackets. We're definitely going to want props as a parameter. And back in dashboard, let's definitely keep our haikus.map. But in terms of what we're going to return, let's just return the haiku component. Now we don't need to lose this code that we have, so I would just take this div and select all the way down to the closing div, cut that into your clipboard. We're going to move it into our haiku file. But in its place, what are we going to return? Well, we don't need the parentheses. We're just going to return our haiku component. Now let's be sure to import that up at the top here. So import haiku from, and we're already in the components folder, so just / for the current folder, haiku. Can save that. Let's go into haiku.jsx. And then just return parentheses, paste in your clipboard. Now this would no longer have access to index, so we don't need that. You can go put that back in dashboard. Just give this haiku a key of quotes, curly brackets, index. And then back in haiku, instead of accessing these things directly, we would now access them with props dot, props dot. And then back in dashboard, we would just want to be sure to pass that along as a prop. So like I would have a prop called haiku, like with the data itself, and that would just equal curly brackets, haiku that exists in the map context. Okay, then also up at the top of this file, we no longer need the delete haiku server action in dashboard directly. So I would move that into our haiku file. So I'd cut that here, move it over to haiku. Let's save this and see what other errors we have, because I'm running out of brain horsepower to try to predict the error messages. Let's see. Link is not defined. Okay, so in dashboard, we no longer need link. We would cut that, put that into haiku. Let's give that a save. Haiku is not defined. Okay, so down here, again, this would not be haiku.id. This would be props.haiku. Same thing with this. This would be props.haiku. All right, beautiful. All right, so now we have our own brand new haiku component, and now we're ready to actually display the image, right? So it would be like props.haiku.photo. However, if you look at your database, just this alone, like you can't just paste your public ID into a URL address bar and expect to load a photo. So what we're going to do, again, is use an amazing pre-created component for us from the Next Cloudinary component library. It's called CLD image. So we can click on basic usage, and really all you need to do, obviously import it, but then really it just needs your public ID value for its source. It will use your environment variables for everything else, like the cloud name and where to look. So this is very simple. I would just select this line and then include that up at the top of haiku. And then while we're at it, you do need to make this a use client component, I believe. We can try it without it, but I'm pretty sure you need that. So let's go ahead and save that. Go back to the documentation, and now let's just actually use the component. So I would copy those lines, and then let's start just at the top of our div maybe. So just right here above line number 1, let's just adjust this. So the source would be source equals curly brackets, and this would just be props.haiku.photo. Let me give that a save. Yep, so we did need use client. So at the top of that, it would just be use client. Awesome. And I mean, the size is way off, but you and I can change that. If you zoom out, there is the photo coming from our Cloudinary cloud. So now let's just fine tune the sizes a bit. Let's have a fallback image in case, for the haikus that don't have a photo, so on and so forth. Let's change the width to be 650. So 650. Let's change the height to be only 300. And let's say sizes equals, let's go with like 650px. Whoops, I already had a sizes attribute over here. Let me get rid of that there. Cool. Let me give that a save and see what that gets us. All right, so it looks like I'm going to need to crop the image in order to get the aspect ratio that I want. Now here's what's really cool. I'm going to use Cloudinary's AI features. So like if I wanted this image to be like this aspect ratio, well, that's going to be really difficult to just crop it this way. So instead, AI can generate like a new part of the image over here and a new part of the image over here. So check this out. Watch how easy this is. On the CLD image, let's give it a new property of crop and set that to equal one set of curly brackets for something dynamic and then another set for an object. And let's say type should be quotes pad, and then let's say source should be true. So this will really control the aspect ratio perfectly, and then let's use AI to sort of fill in the rest. So you just give it a prop of fill background. That's it. You don't need to say equals anything, just fill background as a prop without a value. Let's give that a save and see what that gets us. Cool. So it looks like a dog inside like the bed of a truck. I mean, that's what's funny about AI, right? Like yours is going to be different depending on each image you use. So let me try a new one, like create haiku. I'll say my new test, and I'll use that for all 3 lines. Let me choose an image here. Let me choose this panda. So you can see the photo is in portrait mode, but let's see the AI turn it into a landscape portrait, or excuse me, a landscape photo. So I'll click submit. Now, in just maybe like 5 minutes from now, we can set up loading icons that sort of spin or bounce while your image is being generated. Let me zoom in a little bit here, but there you go. So you're going to get different results on each image, but I think this is really cool. It adds more space horizontally, so now we would actually have the room to layer the haiku lines right about here. Right? So let's focus on that next. Let's actually use these string values and like not using CSS, but like the actual image file. I want the text to exist right about here. To make that happen, on the CLD image component, you just give it a prop of overlays. Now let's set this to equal curly brackets and then an array, because you can have multiple. I'm going to have 2 because I want to create sort of like a shadow effect. So I'll basically just clone the text and use a darker, like a black color that sits like, 5 pixels to the bottom right. So it looks like a drop shadow. So let's have like, 1 curly bracket comma, and then we'll just duplicate this one to replace this one once we're actually, once we've spelled it out. So in the first one though, let's give it a property of position. We'll fill this out in just a moment. Say comma, let's give it a property of text, colon, curly brackets. Okay, and then let's just fill these in. So for position, let's go with like an x-axis value of 34. Let's go with a y-axis value of like 154. Let's give it an angle of like -10 degrees. And let's say gravity. This defines like, is it coming in from the top left? Is it coming in from the bottom right? So let's say a value of north_west. So in other words, top left. All right, and then for our text property, let's give it values of, so first of all, let's start with the text itself, not the drop shadow. So that would be white. And then let's say font family. Let's go with Source Sans Pro. Okay, let's use a font size of 42. Let's use a font weight of bold. And then what should the actual value be? For now, let's just try hello world. Ooh, looks like we forgot a comma there. Let's just try hello world with an exclamation. And then in just a moment, we can make this our actual dynamic haiku value. So this is the white text, and now I also want a drop shadow. So I'm realizing though the order was off. So instead of this empty object down here, let's get rid of that. Get rid of the comma. Just take this entire inner purple object and just duplicate it. So at the start of the array, just paste it in, hit comma, and then let's do this. Let's have the first copy have a color of black, and then the second one can have a color of white. Let's give that a save and see what that gets us. So it's going to take a few seconds for the image to reload or regenerate, but there we see hello world. Cool. So now let's just have multiple lines. Let's have like line 1, line 2, and line 3. So here's what I would do. For the text value, let's just spell out, instead of quotes, let's do a template literal, so backticks. Now in just a moment we'll have line 1 here, but for now let's just say ABC. And now I want a line break. We can have a line break with percentage symbol, and then 0, and then uppercase A. And then let's say ABC again, and then let's have percentage 0, A, and then let's have ABC for line 3. So now we just fill in these ABCs with the dynamic value. So instead of the first ABC, $ curly brackets, this would be props.haiku.line1. Do the same thing for the next ABC. So props.haiku.line2. And the final ABC, $ curly brackets, props.haiku.line3. All right. Let's use that same exact text line for our drop shadow copy. So down here, just replace text with that line. Let's give it a save and see what that gets us. Well, that is indeed our dynamic text, but I'm not seeing the drop shadow. I've been filming too long today. Of course I don't see the drop shadow. I didn't change the X and Y coordinates for the drop shadow. So let's have the first copy use, these values, but then let's change the X and Y coordinates for this. Let's go with 30 and 150. See what that gets us. Cool. So that's the effect I was going for. If I scroll down and look at the other haiku, nice. This is looking good. So from here, we have some fine tuning to do. We no longer need to output the plain text. And then I also want to convert edit and delete to instead be like graphical icons that sit in the bottom right corner of the haiku. And then finally, I want to give like the image rounded corners. And then I also want to set things up so that after you create a haiku and the image hasn't been generated yet, there's like, right, that awkward 3 seconds where it's being generated. I want to show like a bouncing or spinning loading icon. Luckily for us, Tailwind and Daisy UI are going to make all of this very easy to set up. So let's jump back into our haiku file. And here's what I'm going to do. Let's start up at the very top of the div that we're returning. All right, so the first thing I'm going to do is, let's give it a few class names. So I'm going to say class name, singular, say relative, rounded-XL, overflow, hidden. Let's give it a max width, and then to use an arbitrary value, it's square brackets, and let's go with 650px. Let's give that a save and see what that gets us. Whoops, that's still not centered. It looks like I forgot the MX-Auto class. Let me go back here really quick. Yes, so we would just say mx-auto. Cool, now it's actually centered. All right, now let's go ahead and remove this text, and then we can focus on moving edit and delete to instead sit right about here. So back in Haiku, we no longer need this area with line 1 through 3 and BR tags. We also don't need this horizontal rule. All right, and then let's move our edit and delete link and form. Let's cut that into our clipboard. Let's wrap that in a wrapper div that has a class of absolute, and then just paste that back into that div. And let's also, in addition to absolute, let's say like bottom 2, right 2, and also flex. Let's see what that gets us. Cool, so it's looking a lot better. You can see the edit and delete text down there. Now we just want to turn those into graphical icons. First of all, though, let's add spacing in between each haiku. So on the overall div up here, let's just go with like MB7. Nice. All right, now let's focus on the edit and delete icons. So let's go back down here. So first of all, for the edit link, instead of just text that says edit here, let's have an icon. So from the same people behind Tailwind, is a collection of icons called hero icons. It's just heroicons.com. And I'm going to use the, what is it, the micro size. So it's 16 pixels by 16 pixels. And let's look for a pencil or edit icon. So like, what if I just search for edit? Yeah, so it's totally up to you. Probably either one of these though. I'll just go with the pencil. So I'll click copy JSX, and then, instead of edit text, just replace that, paste in your clipboard. And then on the opening link tag, let's give that a few classes. So I would say class name equals quotes. Let's go with inline dash block. Let's go with margin right 1. Let's go with BG black / 40% or just 40. And then let's say hover BG black / 50%. So it gets a little bit darker when you hover over it. Let's say padding 1 and text white 60. And maybe when you hover over it, it becomes text white 80. And finally, rounded corners. Cool. I think that looks like a great start. Now let's do the same thing for the delete form button. So back on that Hero Icons website, if I search for delete, I'm just looking for like a trash can. What if I search for the word trash? Yes, if you just search for trash, that one looks nice. Let's click copy JSX. Back in our code, let's look for the delete form. Here it is. So on the button, instead of the word delete, just get rid of it, paste in your clipboard. All right, and then we do want to give that button a few classes. So class name singular, but we don't need to type them out again. I would just copy and paste the classes that we just spelled out for the edit button. So I would just copy that, paste it here, see what that gets us. Oops, actually that one doesn't need MR1. We don't need any margin on the right. And instead of inline block, let's just try block. Nice, that looks great, except it looks like the trash can icon didn't actually end up in my clipboard. Okay, maybe now it is. Let's try that again here. So instead of that SVG, we want this SVG. Beautiful. So if I try to edit this one, I'll change this to my amazing haiku. Click submit. Now here, this brings up a good point. Notice how it took a few seconds for it to regenerate that image. I mean, obviously the change went through, but I want a nice like loading or bouncing or spinning icon to appear. And I also want it to be the exact same aspect ratio of this image. So that way it doesn't like reshuffle or repaint or reflow the content. And then when the image is ready, like when Cloudinary actually generates the image, it just instantly pops in. The page doesn't reflow, and it's just a way more intuitive user experience. So here's how I would set that up. Let's go back into our Haiku file and let's find our CLD image. So up here, and right above the CLD image, I'm going to have a few things. So first of all, I'm going to have an image. So I'll just say image tag, give it a source of quotes / aspect - ratio.png. Self-closing. So this is just going to look at the root of my domain for aspect ratio. Now, how are you going to have an image that lives at the root of your domain in Next.js? Simple. Just create a folder in the root of your project with the name of public. Now, where's this image going to come from? On my computer, in my downloads folder, I have aspect ratio.png. I will make this available in the description or in a pinned comment for this YouTube video, but I promise you'll be able to find a link to this exact file. Just download it and place it in your public folder. And then below that aspect ratio image, let's have a div. And let's give it a class of absolute. And here's what we're going to do. Inside of it, we're going to have a span. And we don't need any text in the span, but we're going to give the span class name of loading dots, loading large or LG, and then margin auto. It's going to center it. And then on the parent div, in addition to absolute, let's say inset 0, BG gray 200, and use display grid. So this will center it so that the animated loading area sits in the very middle of the gray div. And now we just need to make sure that our image, our real actual Cloudinary image, sits on top of this div. In other words, when our real image hasn't loaded yet, it'll be invisible or it won't be taking up any space. So you'll see the loading icon. And then once this loads, it'll just naturally cover this up. So all we would need to do is give our actual image a prop of class name and set that to absolute and inset 0. We don't even need to give it a higher z-index value because it's coming later in the DOM. It will naturally just stack on top. And now you're starting to see the point of the aspect ratio image. Because both of these are using absolute positioning, we want this image to make it take up the natural height. Anyways, let's give this a save, see what it looks like. So things still look okay for the two existing haikus, but let me create a brand new one. So brand new haiku. Let me try a new image here. I'll try an image of this cat. Okay, I'll go ahead and click submit. And awesome, notice how it's loading, it's loading, it's loading. This is a way more intuitive user experience. 5 seconds have gone by, boom. I mean, that's a way better user experience. It didn't reflow or repaint the user interface, it just popped right into place. At this point, let's go ahead and try to set up a fallback image, because remember, these earlier haikus, they don't have a photo property in the MongoDB database because we set these up and created these before we even had added in our Cloudinary integration. So in other words, if someone creates a haiku and they type in their 3 lines of the poem, but they don't upload a photo, here's what we're going to do. Go into your Cloudinary dashboard and click on folders up at the top here, and then click into samples. You might need to double click it. Yeah, actually it's a double click. And depending on when you created your Cloudinary account, like if you created your account 2 years ago or 3 years ago or 3 days ago, you're going to have different sample images. So I can't promise that the exact sample image I choose will exist in your account. But the idea is like, and actually most of these look like videos, so I'm not even seeing any great images that I can use. What you could actually do is just upload an image into your samples folder. So just literally drag and drop. So I have a pink background image. I'm just going to drag and drop that into samples. Cool. Now yours, and you could use any fallback image you wanted, but the idea is let's right click, or not right click, let's choose these 3 dots here and choose rename. So just change its public ID to be, and I'm again just making this up, it could be anything, but just so you and I are on the same page, let's name it fallback and click save. Cool, now let's go use that in our haiku component. So like if there is no photo property in our database, we'll just use that. So here's how you can set that up. It's really simple. Before we return any JSX, I'll just have a little bit of logic here. I'll say if props.haiku.photo, and then exclamation to check for the opposite. Like if it doesn't exist, if this evaluates to false, then let's just set props.haiku.photo to equal, quotes, go inside the samples folder, and we named it fallback. Let's give that a save and see if that works as expected. So you can see it's loading, it's loading. Awesome. So, I mean, you could choose a more interesting fallback photo, but there you go. So now these images that don't have a real photo, it'll use that. It's placing their haiku text. Awesome. Let's test out adding a photo to an existing haiku. So this one that says brand new haiku below the dog, let me try to edit this, and I'll change this to with a new photo. And then let me try to actually add a new photo here. I'll go with this picture of a cheetah. It's loading, it's loading. Let me click submit. Let me scroll down a little bit. So there's the loading icons. Hopefully in about another 3 or 4 seconds, we see a cheetah. 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3. I mean, this is, well, there's 2, thanks to the power of AI, now there's 2 cheetahs. I think that's fun. I think that's pretty cool. All right, but there we see our updated text. After all these changes we've made, let's test deleting haikus. So let me delete all of these ones that would need the fallback. So click the trash icon. Awesome. I'm going to click it again. Beautiful. Cool. Let me refresh to make sure that actually persisted. It absolutely did. Nice. Just a few more details at the end here. Remember way earlier in the video, I promised you I would show you a way to have cleaner paths when you're importing things. Right, like for example, in our edit haiku ID folder in page.jsx, you're having to go up 3 folders. So wouldn't it be nice if there was a really clean way of just saying like, hey, go to the root of our project and then go in lib, and instead of having to count how many folders you're going up and down. Well, there's a really easy way to set that up. Let's go ahead and go into our command line and press Control-C. Whoops, we'll get to that in just a second. Let's take a look at what's going on here. So when we're passing the entire database document into our Haiku component, we want to convert the author property to just be a simple string instead of a MongoDB buffer. So here's what I would do. In dashboard, yes, so right here where we're looping through and then we're calling our Haiku component, essentially before we return anything in that function, so right above that line, I would just overwrite the author property and the ID property, really, both of them, because they're both MongoDB ID. So I would say like Haiku dot underscore ID should now equal Haiku underscore ID and call the toString method. And then I would do the same thing for the author. So Haiku dot author equals Haiku dot author dot toString. Cool. So that should get rid of all those warnings. Let me refresh a couple times, go back into VS Code. Beautiful. Now back to the real task at hand. Go ahead and stop this command line task. And I wanted to show you how to have clean import paths, right? So you don't have to go up so many folders manually. All we need to do is create, let me collapse my sidebar files, is create a brand new file in the very root of our project. And it needs to have this exact name, jsconfig.json. In the file, we're going to have an object and then say quotes compiler options. And that's going to be an object inside of it. Say quotes paths, quotes, curly brackets, quotes @ / colon, and then square brackets, and then just quotes dot / You can save that. And now let's start up our dev task again. So npm run dev. And now I think the best, cleanest way to check this out would be like edit Haiku. If you go into page.jsx, right, because it's going up like 3 directories, you can fix this now or, clean it up. You can just say @ / and that way you don't have to worry. It's just going to the root of your project folder and going from there. It's a little bit cleaner. It's a little bit less to keep track of navigating. You can see I can save that. We're not running into any errors. I could try to edit a Haiku just to prove my point here. So I'll say like edited Haiku. Cool. So everything's working, but the @ symbol just makes it a nice developer experience. All right, one final detail that I want to cover before we end this video. So if I log out, earlier in the course when we set up the login feature, so if I click on login, we set up validation, but we forgot to show the failure message, actually in the UI, in the HTML or JSX. So like if I fail at logging in, yes, it doesn't let me in, but where's that message that says invalid username or password? Here's how I would set that up. To jog our memory, let's go into actions and then into user controller. And we're looking for our login function. So basically, if you fail a login, we are returning a fail object where success is going to be false and it has a message. So let's just go use that in the form. So inside of app and then in login, we got page.jsx. And now where this is going to exist that we can check is form state, right? So in other words, instead of checking like for unique username errors and unique password errors, let's actually remove the one that would go for passwords. Just remove that curly bracket area entirely, right? That way there's only one potential error message. We don't need to show 2. And the condition would just be form state if success equals false. Whoops, not a string of text, just false. And then the text down here would be, form state dot message. Let's give that a save and test it out. So let me refresh. So I have not attempted to log in yet, but if I get it wrong on purpose, nice. But if I successfully log in to Kitty Doe, excellent. Now, if I log out and log in as don't want to register an account. I want to click log in as Barks a lot. I just want to test to make sure that, yes, you're only seeing your haikus. So for extra credit, you could go ahead and create a little bit of logic that if you're logged in, but you don't have any haikus where you're the author, maybe we show like a gentle message here that says, you have 0 haikus. Use the button in the header to create your first one. Sky is the limit. It's up to you. There are a million improvements you could make to this app, but hopefully this video gave you a great starting place. Hopefully now you understand cookies and JSONWebTokens and integrating with a database and integrating with an API like Cloudinary. Right? At the end of the day, let me log back in to Kitty Doe. At the end of the day, you now have a fully functioning app. And guess what? The best part is you could host this on the live web very easily. I won't walk through that with you step by step, but I will let you know. Let me collapse my sidebar. All you would need to do is create a new file, call it gitignore. I want to show you how to not accidentally reveal any of your secret data. So in .gitignore, you would just say, you don't need node modules. You don't need the .next folder. But the big one, the key one, if the only thing you have in this file is this, then I've done my job. Be sure to ignore your .env file. And then if you're on Mac, let's ignore, .ds_store. Let's save that. And with this in place, all you would need to do now is initialize this as a Git repo. So git init. I'm not going to walk through this with you, but you would just push this up to GitHub, sign up for a completely free account on Vercel. Vercel is definitely the easiest and beginner-friendly best way to host your Next.js app. Let your Vercel account have access to your GitHub account, connect the dots, create a new project using this GitHub repo, and that's it. You just need to go into Vercel and manually paste in your environment variables. And that's it. Once you give Vercel your environment variables, everything should absolutely work. I tested this out yesterday morning. You would now have this fully functioning application, only you would have your real, Vercel domain that you could share with friends and family, and they could start testing out your Haiku app. I think it's going to really make you feel like a powerful, real-world programmer to see haikus that you didn't even generate, right? That maybe your friends or family generated. They chose the picture, they chose the text. I think that would make you feel so amazingly good about your new programming skills. That is going to bring this video to a close. Thank you once again. A huge, huge, huge thank you to Cloudinary for sponsoring this video and making this tutorial freely available on YouTube. If you enjoyed this video, if you enjoyed my teaching, you might enjoy my full premium courses, which are available on my website, learnwebcode.com. Thank you so much for watching this video until the very end. I hope you feel like you learned something, and stay tuned for more web development tutorials.